Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 10th and final episode of this, the first season of our weekly podcast, Just Politics, Our World View, where we discuss politics in Barbados, the region, and the rest of the world. We'll be taking a short break, but you can join us here again next year from January 17th and every Sunday after that from 5 to 7 p.m. Let me first thank you all for your support during this season as you chose to be with us each week because I know you have options. And I also want to thank you, Sasha Lee. You jumped on board when you saw some potential in this show, but realized that we were struggling, and you have expertly managed our social media posts and our marketing since then, and we could not have done it this well without you. So thank you for joining us, and welcome again to our show. I am your host, Ayo Olalara, and these are my co-hosts, Devron Bruce and Dr. Terry Harris. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Ayo. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so this week, we have prepared a special episode to close out 2020, a very difficult year for most, right? So our guests this evening are most of the past guests from this season, and they're here to talk about the important political happenings this year, among other things. We have with us, in the order of appearance, political analyst Corey Sandiford. Hi, Corey. All right, Corey's muted. Political scientist Peter Wickham, gender and communication specialist Farhana Balbua, the first vice president of the Democrat Liberal Party, Ryan Walters, and political scientists with University of the West Indies, Doctors George Brathwaite, Christina Hines, and Tennyson Joseph. This week's episode is brought to you by Desiree Properties Inc., Building the Future. You can contact them at 624-0593 or by email at desireepropertiesinc@icloud.com. So one more time, this week's episode is brought to you by Desiree Properties Inc. You can reach them at 624-0593 or desireepropertiesinc@icloud.com. And now over to you, Ayo, for the weekly roundup.
Thank you, Terry, and welcome back to the weekly roundup. In Barbados, the government has decided to award those persons who performed essential duties during the pandemic with cash, and I can't think of a better trophy than one that I can spend. So I certainly approve. And Tracy Lee believes that the government is not doing enough to bring tourism back. Hold on, sir. Just give them a chance to take a dip in Miami Beach. After all, COVID really isn't as serious as sewage.
Okay.
But in the USA, Biden is definitely the president-elect. Was it even official if Mitch McConnell didn't accept it? Well, he did, so I guess that's that on that. And if you're a Bajan living in London, like my good friend here, I'm planning to come home, you'll have to wait till after the Tier 4 COVID lockdown. We are so lucky here on this island in so many ways. All this hustling, bustling, bumper to bumper traffic, long supermarket lines for Christmas. But count your blessings, sir. Anyway, here are some of the best memes this week from these internet streets. And you guys know that I can't resist a Trump meme. This one pokes fun at Trump for being a one-term president. Yeah, I'm not gonna read it. You guys read it. And I've never heard of this condition before, but Trump has lost this election so many times. He must suffer from electoral dysfunction.
Oh my goodness.
And speaking of electoral dysfunction, I found this one funny also. It says, I don't remember so much skepticism when Pfizer announced Viagra. Gentlemen.
No comment.
And yes, it's Sheraton. What's that?
I'm not that old.
This is a Sheraton weekly roundup because you have so many guests. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the final roundup from us for 2020. And it has been so much fun. Viewers, please note that you can also ask questions and contribute to the program with your comments. Simply type them into the comment section below. WhatsApp us on 833-9886 or email us at jp@gmail.com. And please keep sharing this live, liking our page as we attempt to grow as organically as possible. You guys have been great so far in helping us to build this platform, and we appreciate your help and your support. And now I will introduce you to our first guest, Mr. Corey Sandiford. Turn on your mic, Corey.
Hi. I was just distracted by something. I'm here. Hello, all. Good evening. Please, thanks for this opportunity to be on your final program of the season with the heavy hitters.
Thank you for joining us on the heavy hitters, quote unquote. So I'm just going to get right into the program because we have quite a few people coming on, and I don't want it to stretch on into the, too long. So we're just going to get right into it. My first question to you, Corey, is as a political analyst, what are some of the biggest political events that have happened this year for you?
Okay, so my highlight, which I prepared for the show, I didn't know you wanted moments. I brought a moment or well, a series of moments which culminates into one story, which is the outcomes of elections in Guyana, the juxtaposition of electoral outcomes in Guyana versus the US. And that for me stood out in 2020. And just a quick recap for your viewers, if you didn't follow the Guyanese election, you were probably among the few. It was a protracted saga which took over a year, if you date all the way back to the no confidence motion. And it was a series of no confidence motions, your actual election, then you had court injunctions, and then you had recount statements of polls, statements of recounts, and petitions by private citizens and the like. But the point being that to anyone from the outside that was impartial, it would appear as though the then sitting APNU AFC government had a vested interest in not accepting any electoral outcome that did not place them as the winners. And then in July, the US government duly got involved and sought to impose sanctions on top officials in the then government, APNU AFC government, which would have revoked their permits. They were no longer able to travel to the US. And I dare say the involvement of the US and key international bodies probably are some of the elements that eventually brought about the actual acceptance of the electoral outcome and change of the government. And here you have that, you have the US basically making statements, the US government towards Guyana, saying that it's basically going against the principles of democracy, all of that. And you fast forward a few months, astute minds could have seen it coming, but you fast forward a few months and you have the exact same process playing out in the US. In this case, the acceptance of the electoral result is not necessary in terms of President Trump, but you have the same issue of court cases, electoral recounts taking place in the US. So it is just funny to see this play out in front of the Caribbean. I would say that by July or so, I think they eventually accepted the outcome in Guyana in early August. And by then, I think that it was a regional spectacle. Like you had all the islands in the Caribbean looking on and saying, what is really going on here? How is this story going to end? It honestly, at one point, looked like it could just go on forever and ever, because you just had, when one court motion was defeated, you had another private citizen filing one, and these were basically party supporters for the then sitting government. And it finally went through, and now you have the US, where it's like in front of an international audience. And the latest that I'm hearing, I'm seeing stories online yesterday, like what will happen if Trump refuses to physically remove himself from the White House on inauguration day. You're seeing Michael Flynn, his disgraced, now pardoned former official, coming out and saying that Trump could seek to impose martial law in certain states, the swing states, force new elections there. It's like, what exactly is going on here? Not only in a democracy, but what is supposed to be the leading democracy in theory, right? Because I know Deveron will have a few things to say about whether or not the US is the leading democracy in the world. But anyhow, in theory, so we like to say, or so they like to say, that is the leading democracy in the world, and it's like not real life. And I think if the context of the convo we're having this evening is moments like, that political moments this year that kind of shape history, the US are really going to have to ask themselves going forward about this office of the president and the powers that are endowed, and what he's able to do, the positions that they're able to take. Because I always do find that in these democracies, we kind of depend on decency and etiquette in some degrees. There are loopholes that if you have an unscrupulous individual such as Donald Trump, who comes along, fills office, all of a sudden you didn't know these loopholes existed before, but you know now. Or you might be in Barbados and you might be waiting for election after the government dissolves itself, and you realize that nobody could force the actual sitting prime minister to call the election. But nonetheless, the last point I will make before I revert back to you, Ayo or Terry, is that I do think that when you have, it takes a certain mindset within a large swaths of the electorate in order for people such as Donald Trump or just very bizarre, backwards thinking governments or officials to rule. It takes people to buy into certain things, because in as much as Trump is bizarre, you would have to say his support base is bizarre. And let's not forget for 1 minute that when we talk about these historical numbers that have voted for Biden to bring Joe Biden into power as the new president, the president-elect, that the numbers for Trump are quite large as well. He far superseded what he was able to achieve in 2016. And, you would expect maybe a sitting president to lose some of his support depending on how the election might swing, or gain some new support, but certainly not the numbers that we thought he did. This means that we have people who are basically not only giving Trump a pass, but you're basically affirming everything he does and saying, yes, we want more of this. And not only do we want more of this, we sense that something is afoot and we want to defeat it. And that is why they're having such a tough difficulty accepting the electoral outcome. And I do want to say that a Trump supporter, to me, have come to realize, is somebody who easily buys into conspiracy theories, is somebody who easily blames their problems on other people. And that is why you have them very easily able to buy into a president who, even long before the election, says to the public, more or less, if I lose the election, then something is wrong. I am not accepting any other electoral outcome. If I win, fine. But if I lose, then something is wrong, and it was obviously stolen from me. And that was bought into long before the election was held. And it takes a certain mindset to buy into that. So that's my point.
Well,
Terry or Ayo?
Thanks, Corey.
Or Deborah?
Thanks, Corey. But yeah, I think the Republicans, concerning whether America is a democracy, the Republicans like to tell you America is a republic, right? So I don't know if they actually believe in democracy anymore, but we'll see. Come January the 20th is when Biden is supposed to take up office. We'll see what actually happens in short order.
I think people believe in democracy for themselves and people like them, but not democracy for other people. I believe in democracy as long as it suits me and my interests. The people that I want to see in office. If anybody else gets voted in, then it's a problem.
Yeah, I don't think I would like to see Trump being dragged out of the White House. So I really would like him to resist giving up peace. Well, I didn't say that.
You want bashment? That's what we're looking for.
We're all thinking it, right? We like to see Trump be dragged out. We would like to see him, put up the barricaded doors and put up a resistance and have the Secret Service drag him up. We like to see that, right? But
I don't want to see it.
It wouldn't.
I wouldn't mind seeing it if it could take place in a parallel universe or some sort of vacuum.
But this one,
his support base is too volatile.
It's true.
I think I made reference to that last time it was on today, about basically the mounting conversation, the tension raising. He himself elevated the tension by starting that narrative long before the election. I watched a BBC program that said he had about 80 tweets, Trump and his tweets, that when they tracked how many tweets he had made reference to stealing the election, it was like 80 tweets. So he started that conversation. That was obviously not just happenstance. That was obviously part of his strategy. That was, like, to me, a fail-safe that he put in there that he was going to fall back on. There's no way knowing for him that how it was going to play out once he actually got in. And I think that it's not been particularly effective. But then you have this very cynical take on his overall stance, which is that, well, he doesn't want to lose. We know that, but also more that he's dragging it out just to keep raising funds via his campaign. So I think his definite purpose worked, and I think it has riled up a lot of people because he has given a lot of people who have interest in supporting him. Remember, he's a very singular candidate, so he represents a certain set of values that the people who support him probably don't think that they're going to see and come in another candidate because they haven't seen it before, and they probably suspect it won't come again if he gets put out of office. Having said that, if he paints the picture as one that is being stolen from me, you can see a very violent and volatile reaction to that within the public across the U.S. That's my concern.
Right. No, and I mean, like I was saying, we'd all like to see him be dragged out, but what you're saying is exactly right. He has a mass support, and things could descend very quickly. If in a perfect world, we like to see him be dragged out, thrown into prison or whatever. At least, well, speaking for myself, right? And there'd be no repercussions. But the fact of the matter is that we don't live in that world. We live in a world where there could be some implications, right? And like you said, Trump is a great charlatan. He's a great hypnotist, right? He has hoodwinked a large proportion of the population in America into thinking that somehow this election was quote unquote stolen, and stop the steal, right? Is a lot of the rhetoric you're hearing now from the right. So so we wish them the best. Let's hope for all of our sakes, not forgetting that America has nuclear weapons, that things end peacefully. Everyone?
I tend to have a slightly different take on it. I really think that Trump is building a mass to contain for the future, essentially. So the Republican Party, in essence, is Trump. And therefore, he wants to ensure that he is not seen as unviable going forward. And I suspect he's likely going to run again, or he wants to put himself in a position where he becomes the kingmaker of the Republican Party going forward. What I would say regarding the behavior under this election and other tense periods in US elections like 2001 is the advancement of communication. So now we're living in a digital age and a social media age where it becomes a lot easier to peddle certain narratives. But when we think back to the 2000 election, when there was Florida between Bush and Gore, there were calls and there were claims of the Democrats trying to steal the election, and Democrats were accusing Republicans of trying to steal the election as well too. So that is not new. What is new is the fact that you have social media that can drive that story further, because before, the fundamental or the media was essentially surrounded or driven by cable channels, and they had their own way of filtering some of the negative information and false information. Certain things will not have gone on to CNN or even Fox then, but now there's social media and there's no filter. So it's a lot easier to peddle things that really have no factual basis. So I think, yes, there is some truth into what Corey is saying. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where Trump is going to be dragged off the White House. I'm just saying he's building himself as the next kingmaker of the Republican Party. He doesn't want to lose that ability going forward. That's the position that I see he's trying to take.
I kind of agree with you, Devron. Corey, for the internet, because we're bringing in the next guest that's at 7:30. So for the next 3 minutes, can you tell me what are some of the implications, as briefly as possible, for some of the political events that you pointed out earlier, and what would you like to see going into 2021?
Broad question. I think you meant 5:30, and this I was fancy way of saying able to get kicked off.
Yeah.
But, implications going into 2021, I am unsure. I have quite honestly paid a bit less attention to the Guyanese politics since just to refer to that side before I refer to US. I paid less attention to. I've given the government a 6-month chance to see how things develop there and how the opposition postures itself going into the new year. In the US, I think the continued conversation around Trump is going to be interesting. I disagree with Devron in the sense that yes, the accusations are not true, but I was paying less attention to politics in 2000, but I would be interested to know if it was a Republican versus Democrat in terms of those singular candidates. I think that there's a singularism around Donald Trump. And, you know, Trumpism, he has his own ism. So I think that there's a lot of, it is not Republican. You might have been concerned as a Republican, or you might have been concerned as a Democrat, and there is that here as well. But you have a whole set of Trump supporters who want to see Trump's legacy carry on. I don't know how interested he is in being a kingmaker, but I know he is interested in being the ultimate. And I think that how he continues to shape their politics will depend highly on these court cases that are facing him. In terms of dragging Terry, I will enjoy seeing Donald Trump get dragged through the courts. I really hope to see that. That could be spectacular. I want to see him take a series of losses in them courts. But anyhow, keeping to my time, the play out with him and the Republican Party, I really feel in a way for the Republican Party, because they're posturing themselves as being further and further away from reality. They were in some senses, but then Donald Trump came along and threw them a lifeline in terms of appealing to swaths of the electorate that weren't appealed to before. But by the time they're done, they're like, their branding is so dashed. Like when Donald Trump isn't there, or let's say some of these court cases against him are successful, in order for him to get to 2024, I still am not convinced. I know he's talking about it now, but I'm not convinced that he wants to be also around who comes back in 2024. I'm not sure he wants that ultimately. That will have to play out, and we'll see if it happens. But having said that, with the Republican Party, no, if he takes these losses and he does not end up being the candidate for 2024, where are you? How do you define yourself in absence of Trump, when the person you've been packing in the party, you following him because he got the following? Where are you after that? Anyhow, that's my look forward to 2021. I won't take any more of your time. Thanks for having me on. No need to kick me off. Have a great rest of the show. I hope that when I introduce my topic, one of your other guests was like, shucks, gotta find something else. No.
Anyway.
That's okay. There's much more to talk about, even on those topics. But thank you so much for joining us, Corey, and thank you for joining the show initially. And thanks for your support.
Can I, before you kick me off, can I just say Merry Soca Christmas to everybody? I hope to see Rudy Grant on my channel 8 at some point in time singing my favorite Christmas song that I can't find on YouTube. So happy holidays to all of you for who don't celebrate Christmas as well. And all the best for 2021 and this continued pandemic. Good evening to all.
Yeah. Thanks,
All
Corey.
right,
Likewise. And thanks for
Corey.
All
right, see you guys.
See you.
I don't know what you want to see Donald Trump dragged off. You guys are crazy.
Hey, you know,
there's no love lost for the man, but jeez.
I'd like to see him.
Y'all just cruel.
Oh.
Welcome to the show, Peter.
If there were no questions. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Terry. Hi, Ayo, Deborah.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Peter.
In this environment. So here we are at the end of the most absurd year in our individual history.
Yeah.
Absolutely absurd.
Just
but,
get through.
Yeah, I'm gonna just get right into the conversation a bit. Were you listening to Corey conversation?
No, I wasn't. I'm afraid not. No, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So I'm not gonna ask you because I want to ask you the implications, because he was talking about the Guyanese election,
Okay.
you know, because that was absolutely crazy too. And he was also talking about the US election. So I was going to ask you about what you thought about the implications coming out of everything that surrounded those two events.
It's a good place to start, and it's ironic because one of the reasons I wasn't listening to Corey was because I was doing a program with Telesur.
Okay.
They have an English language channel, and they were reviewing the year, and one of the issues that came up was the question of what would be the most significant political event for the year, and we were talking about those two elections. Some years ago, I wrote an article in the paper where I talked about how to steal an election, you know, and I was identifying ways and means that you could technically steal an election. But at the conclusion of it, I came to the point that it's pretty easy to steal an election. It's very, very difficult to get away with it, because getting away with stealing an election is a challenge. I mean, you can stuff ballot boxes and whatnot. Those are things that have been done. But the reality is that the only legal mechanism where you can tip your hand on the scales is voter padding. But in Guyana, voter pattern won't get you very far simply because it's a proportional representation system. So stealing an election in the context of Guyana is difficult. So I would say that the fact that the election in Guyana was attempted to be stolen, or there was an attempt to steal it, and that attempt was not successful, largely because of the amount of transparency. I would say that that is the most significant political event. And it's interesting that the American government attacked the Guyanese government and for their trying to put their hand on the scales. And then it was ironic that Donald Trump started to do the same thing. And in both instances, there has been a level of transparency that has ensured that it was impossible. In the case of Guyana, they were arguing that we should have cameras watching the recount. In the United States of America, there were cameras watching the recount. And once you have that, you know, both recounts in the US, recounts in Guyana showed that the original results were the correct results. And in both instances, the eyes of the world were essentially on it. And it was allowing us to see what's going on. So I think coming out of it, the implication for it would be that we are even more convinced than ever before that it's virtually impossible to thief an election and get away with it. Well, it clearly is possible to try to steal it, but you can't really get away with it. And I think that these two elections have proven conclusively that transparency is the key to all of this. I know Deveron is big on the what they call them, the observers, and observers are important in the Caribbean. And observation is important, but I think the best observers are essentially the eyes of the public. You know, put more cameras, put more, the statement of polls were published on all of those different regions and all of the places up in the far-flung regions of Guyana. The statement of polls were published. That's transparency. And I think that that really is like the eyes of the world on elections. So I'm comfortable at the end of the year. I mean, I know in preparation for the program, you told me to reflect on what I thought was significant. And I think that that really would be, we had 2 attempted hijacks and both were unsuccessful for the same reasons in 2020. So that would be it for me.
You guys want to go? Ask Peter? Don't make me answer all the questions, yeah?
You have all the questions. So Peter, quick question on, well, closer to home, closer to, well, 2 questions actually. One closer to home in Europe with regards to Brexit. What do you think is going to happen there? And the other one closer to home in Barbados. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the ruling government going into 2021?
Well, let me start with the easy one first. I think the biggest challenge facing any government anywhere in the world is managing this COVID pandemic. And Prime Minister Motley has actually set herself an ambitious agenda notwithstanding COVID. And I would say that she's given herself a task. I believe the people of Barbados would reward her generously for having been able to deal with COVID. But you're doing that, and on top of that, you are attempting to introduce a republic, you are removing Lord Nelson, you are making changes to national insurance, you know, you basically putting out a lot of fires along the way. And I think that that's pretty incredible. So I think the challenge to her and all the other region Caribbean governments is basically being able to manage COVID in an environment where probably 70 or 80% of us are employed in the tourism sector, and the tourism sector is pretty much dead. So that's it, you know, but I'm seeing some glimmers coming through. You know, one of them, she spoke yesterday about this immigration bill and the fact that a lot of these welcome stampers are being encouraged to make Barbados their home. And I feel that if that gets going, that can be one of the significant achievements of this era going forward. So that's important. Brexit, I really don't know. I mean, I always felt that by now they would have an agreement on the table. I would like to think that the Boris Johnson administration is not foolish enough to allow the 1st of January to come without a deal and for the kind of mass confusion and chaos that we've been seeing in the United Kingdom already. I don't know whether you saw, Terry, the photos, but essentially the highway leading into to Lanzan, right, Calais is crazy. And I'm still not understanding. They have done that. They have subjected themselves to a reduction in their GDP. They have voluntarily created unemployment. They have created economic hardship. They have sent up the cost of living. And I'm still struggling to understand how could a right-thinking leader carry his people into that kind of situation on the back of something called independence and sovereignty. Because independence and sovereignty don't mean anything to the people that are going to be facing this untold hardship. I mean, you're talking about independence and sovereignty, right? A drug is developed to help deal with COVID, which is one of the major crises that you face. You got imported from Belgium. I mean, how odd is that? But yet still you're saying that you are the greatest, most independent country in the world. You really clearly don't have the capacity. You know, car manufacturing plants, there's one of them that's now on hold. But at the same time, I realize that Boris Johnson is a peculiar bird, and he seems willing to force a no-deal Brexit just to make the point that he did it. And I find it crazy to think that up to now they don't have an agreement. But you know, on the other side of the Atlantic, on the other side of the channel, you have leaders like Macron, who is going into an election shortly, and Merkel and whatnot. All of them are unified in their position that they know that they have far less to lose than him. And I think that they've taken a position that, look, we want a level playing field consistent with our terms. We want access to fish in your waters. You could jump high or low, and unless you give us those two things, you can take the no-deal Brexit, because ultimately you'll be the one that's over there languishing. And I think that that's the common position that they're taking. And I really wish them well. Boris Johnson is insisting that he has the power and he will not do it. So really at this stage, I don't know. It's possible that he will force a no-deal just to make a point. And the fact that he has such political popularity means that he can do it. So I really can't say that I have the answer to that question. If you asked me a month ago, I would say, yeah, they'll have a deal. But I'm really curious now, because we're down to the point now where we have days remaining, you know, and now they're in lockdown, which means that they have other priorities.
Exactly. I have no idea whether we're going to have a deal or not. Why would a leader want to put his people through this? To seize power, right? I think that's what it was. I think he wanted to go down as a prime minister, and he'll go down as a prime minister. The prime minister that practically destroyed the economy, and mismanaged the global pandemic, but, you know, he went down as a prime minister. Devron, you had something to say?
So to bring things back home again, Peter, you mentioned that government is currently putting out many fires in 2021. They will continue to do so. But beyond COVID, what are some of the things that you would like to see government address? Progressive areas that you would like to see government possibly address? I know there's a COVID situation that's going to be difficult to find, you know, that balance, but what are some of the areas, maybe 2021, 2022, that you think government should really try to address before it comes to the end of its first term?
Deborah, that's an interesting question. And I'm actually in a place now where the Motley administration has addressed pretty much 90% or even 99% of the concerns that I would have had as a voter, and I feel are important to the progress of Barbados. I believe that the referendum should have been on the table. I think that constitutional reform should be on the table. I believe the 11+ needs to be ended. I think that Barbados needs to recognize same-sex unions of some sort, in some way, shape, or form. I believe that we need to look at the way that we speak to the handicapped. You know, we ought to have had buses that can take up people who are handicapped. I think that's something that was long overdue. Yeah, we need to overhaul the transport system. Pretty much a lot of those issues are being addressed. And my thing is that if at the end of 2023, she has done 90% of those things, I don't know about other voters, but I would be happy that the progressive issues, because yeah, you're putting out fires, but as you're saying, you also have to be dealing with how you deal with progress. And to me, a lot of those things have already been flagged. So the 11+ has been flagged. You know, the same-sex civil unions is supposed to be coming on board. That I think is also an important step. She's looking to bring a republic, which again is a progressive thing. So it demonstrating that you have an administration that can walk and chew gum at the same time. So while we're dealing with the fires and so on, we're also dealing with progress. Immigration bill was one that I just didn't mention, and that is also, to me, is pretty important, because for our natural development, 20 years down the road, we need to get I would say 50 or 60,000 Barbadians more on this rock. And the immigration bill is attempting to deal with that. So I think that is pretty important progress. And a lot of these are things that none of the other Caribbean governments even started to dream about, So I would say, yeah, those are the things that I'm anxious, and I'm happy that the conversation has started. The conversation has started on pretty much all of them. Maybe transport, there is not the level of comprehensive analysis of it going forward that I would like to see. But I guess that's also a progress, because in addition to bringing new buses, we also have to start talking about how we're going to manage the number of cars on the road going forward and whatnot. But then I say that, but then even look, we got conversations starting about the idea of Barbados being green by 2030. That will, in effect, take a number of cars off the road and introduce possibilities for other modes of transportation. So I think that we are, I think we're taking along, we're taking along.
So then you think that a lot of the criticism that the Barbados Labour Party government is getting, do you think it's like unfair somewhat?
Is expected, and I don't think it's unreasonable. Okay. I expect that there will be criticism of an administration, because you have to have that kind of criticism going forward. One of the criticisms I think are fair is the fact that it does appear that this administration is very focused on one person. And the question is, should it be that way? The criticisms about the size of the cabinet and the size of the government is not an unreasonable criticism. What else? Those are some of the things that have been mentioned, and the fact that you're driving change with respect to one person or using one person. Having said that, however, there are good reasons and politically important reasons why all of those things are happening in the way that they're happening. I don't really know any Caribbean country where the leader doesn't drive the process, because that's how we work, And in terms of the size of the cabinet, I understand why it's that big. It's that big because you have won all the seats, and you have to manage a fairly large government. So either you let it fall apart, or alternatively, you push it in that way. So, but the criticism will come, and I think that as time passes, there will be more criticism. But when we come to making a decision in 2023, my feeling is that it is going to be less about a critique of the Barbados Labour Party and more about a question as to whether or not there's an alternative in place. And this is the reason why, Deveron is close to the other side, to the Democratic Labour Party. And I see his voice, his thing is muted now, so he can't respond to the contrary. But no, I think someone needs to say to the DLP that the focus can be on criticizing a government that has historic levels of popular support. It can be that, because that is a battle that you will lose every time. I think it is better for the next 2 years to be spent building up this image that if you don't vote for the Barbados Labour Party, there is an alternative. Unfortunately, that's not now the case. And that's the reason why the outcome of the by-election, jump high or low, it was exactly what would have been expected, in that you have returned the government with a level of support that is comparative in the context of what's going on now with COVID. So yeah, that to me has to be priority for the opposition, not to focus on criticism, but to focus on saying we have an alternative that if needs be, we can form a government, so give us a vote, or at least create a strong opposition so that we can help to battle this thing.
Excellent. So what, sorry, somebody else want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Oyo.
Right. What are the implications though? For what you said just now, going forward into 2020, into 2021 really?
I think that we have this idea that for us to continue with such a strong government, it would be a bad thing. But I honestly, if we continue at this rate, we will have another 30 love, because right now, the way that things are going, to me, we are being left with very little alternative choice but to put back all 30 of them in Parliament. That's the implication. And it's ironic, because I've had this conversation with respect to Grenada. And remember, Mitchell got all the seats 3 times. So for the people who say, oh, this is impossible, it's not going to happen, you know, lightning don't strike in the same place once, I said, well, it struck in the same place 3 times in Grenada. And the reason it struck in the same place 3 times is simply because the opposition in Grenada have a clue what's going on. They lost twice as an opposition, and they lost all the seats once as a government, which is what the DLP has not done once. And I'm saying that in theory, it could happen again, and that could be the implication. I think for now there's no long-term implication for our democracy. And again, this is something that I've heard Devron speaking to. I am not convinced that our democracy in Barbados is threatened by this 30 love situation. And as I tell people, Prime Minister Motley has the same power as Prime Minister Stewart. She has no more power than Prime Minister Stewart. I guess power to change the constitution, but David Thompson had that power as well. And I would say every other Prime Minister of Barbados has had that power at one point in time. So Sandiford had it initially, Tom Adams had it, Owen Arthur had it, and now Barra had it. So the fact that the Prime Minister can change the constitution, she don't need 30 seats to do that. She only need 60% support, which David Thompson had, you know, after he brought over Hamilton Lashley. So I don't really know that there are these long-term implications for democracy in Barbados becoming a dictatorship and that kind of thing. I don't buy into that logic. And I don't believe that there is any less concern about issues of transparency and that type of thing. I think that those issues are probably being more sensitively dealt with now than we would have dealt with under the Stewart administration.
Everyone?
That is interesting, Peter, because you're saying that she has the same power as every other prime minister, yes, officially. But one could argue that the strength of a government is determined as well by the strength of an opposition. And if you have a situation where there is an extremely weak opposition, then there's going to be many things that will fall through that might not have fell through had you had a strong opposition. Had we not had a situation where the previous election, 2013, had 14 Barbados Labour Party members, a lot of the things that the Democratic Labour Party could have or would have done and got away with, many of the things they could not have done had that opposition not been strong enough to voice some of the concerns that the public might have had, and some of the meticulous approach of Motley as an opposition leader at that time to really undermine the government between 2012, 2013 to 2018. So the strength of an opposition, I think, is very important in determining the strength of a government as well. So I think that has to be considered. There's no mistake, or there is no irony, or there is no I'm losing my word there. There's a particular reason why you had a 30 love. One of the reasons you had a 30 love is because you had a very strong opposition at that time between 2013 and 2018 as well. So I think that's one of the things that we have to consider at the same time as well too.
I'm happy that you defended yourself because you were being provoked. But no, I can't say that I can't say that I agree. Look at a couple of the instances in which the opposition was very strong in the last administration. Prime Minister Motley brought out people to march against the solid waste tax. The solid waste tax didn't fail because of anything that Prime Minister Motley did, because ultimately all she could do is vote against it. The solid waste tax failed because it was a pretty useless piece of legislation. It was, you don't create a tax where people have an option to not pay. And, you know, I'm not embarrassed to say that my solid waste tax bill still there sitting down. And most other people like me never really looked at it because it's not really an enforceable tax. It was a bad tax. It was a poorly constructed tax because it was a tax that you could ignore legitimately. And, you know, half of the lawyers in Bridgetown basically were whispering to people, well, you know, if you ain't got any money to pay, don't pay. I mean, mine was huge. And I said, you know, I already got that kind of money. Why would you pay a tax where you don't have the obligation? Well, the current situation now is that if you don't pay what has replaced the solid waste tax, which is a tax on water, you turn off your water. So it's an enforceable tax. While with the solid waste tax, the only thing that they could legitimately have done is to take out your house. And I mean, you can take out somebody's house for an unpaid sewage bill. So I think that that is more the issue. I really don't know that Prime Minister Motley was able to, and I would ask you, Deborah, if you could think of anything that she was able to stop because she was a strong opposition. The solid waste tax was a protest. We had protests over several different things, and a lot of them still happened. There was Cahill. I think Cahill failed largely because the plant that they had in the US blew up somewhere. And everyone said, well, the technology clearly is not ready. And when you listen to Dennis Lowe, when he withdrew the initiative, he said we will have to be crazy to pursue this now simply because the technology has been proven to be a failure. But yet still we were making a lot of fuss and quarrel about Cahill. And ultimately it was going ahead, you know. Government signed the agreement. We have been committed as a country to paying millions of dollars, which we will never see again. Legal fees were paid and whatnot. And all of that was legitimately done by the Stewart administration. There was nothing that Prime Minister Motley could do about it. The oppositions in the Caribbean are very, very weak. Generally speaking, and there's no opposition that can say they're strong enough to say they will stop something. Look at the appointment of a Chief Justice. Right? You are consulted, but you don't have the option to say no. What exactly? I don't know, Deborah. I mean, if you could think of something, but I can't really think of anything that Prime Minister Motley, with all of her strength and her weight and her influence, was able to stop Frenda Stewart from doing. I mean, calling the election was a good example. You know, I think that's the most ridiculous thing, that we went almost 60 days without an election, and there was nothing that you could do to make Frenda Stewart. And you know, every time the issue came up, Frenda Stewart reminded people that ultimately the only person that can name the date for the election is him.
Yes.
And he waited until he was good and ready to do it. He wanted to be Prime Minister for 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. And he waited until such time as he called the election to ensure that win, lose, or draw, he would have been Prime Minister for 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. And ultimately, all of the semantics and the arguing and the cussing and the Peter Wickham and this person saying that he shouldn't do it, he did it. And in any other Caribbean country, it would be the same thing. So I ain't really seeing the opposition strength in that way. Clearly, she had influence, but in terms of the legalese, there's not a lot that she could do.
Well, I would end by saying that it was more so it's easier for oppositions to make indictments onto governments when they have the numbers. That is really what it was pointing to. So she was able to make many indictments onto the government at the time because she had such a strong opposition at that time at the same time, as opposed to now. So that's essentially the point I was making. You can't stop a government from doing anything because it's a majoritarian system, we understand that, but it's easier for oppositions to make indictments onto governments when they have stronger numbers.
I'm sorry, I'm not feeling that argument. I think that is a perception, but I think the reality is that I've seen a boycott of the election in Jamaica in 1981 when Siaga won all the seats simply because Michael Manley was not prepared. People always say that Michael Manley was the most effective opposition leader outside of Parliament for the period of time that he remained outside of Parliament. And he was as effective as if he was in there. And that was without the internet, without access to the radio and call-in programs, because there was none of those in 1981. And he did it fairly effectively. I mean, David Thompson, when he was in Parliament as two people, him and Lowe, they had small numbers in opposition and they brought vote of no confidence, which never really grabbed anyone's attention. But I think that they were reasonably effective outside of Parliament in many instances, because that's where they took the conversation to. And then the infamous three blind mice, you know, that was a small opposition, but a pretty effective opposition. Henry Ford, Boyne Arthur, and David Simmons. They didn't have the numbers, but nonetheless, they were able to bring down a government. And the only opposition that ever brought down a government was an opposition that was basically these three blind mice. I mean, it was more than them by then, but ultimately, you really need just one or two good people to be able to make it work. So I would respectfully disagree. I think we are happier with those numbers, but the fact of the matter is that it doesn't make a huge difference when all is said and done.
Peter, I want to thank you. We can talk to you all evening, honestly, but we have to roll today. And you and Devron can carry on at this whole evening too.
We'll bring it back next. We'll bring it back next.
Okay.
Next season, he and everyone can have and renew this.
But guys, congratulations on a good first year. You chose a good year to start, this kind of conversation. So it was useful, and I appreciated the fact that you brought me on from time to time. So all the best to all of you, Terry, Deveron, and Ayo.
Thank you.
All right, Peter, enjoy.
All the best to you too.
All right. I think that was an interesting conversation as usual. I love talking to Peter, by the way. We're gonna have the next guest now, and this is for Hannah.
Hi.
Hi, Farhana.
Hi.
You're back,
Hey there, Farhana, how are you?
Good. Happy to be back.
We just spoke to you, right?
It seems as though it was just
Like
yesterday.
yesterday.
Right? It seems that way.
It does feel that way. But I was tuning in. I was listening to Corey and Peter before me, so it seems like a very interesting discussion this week for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being here and to share your perspective. We really do need to hear more voices like yours, and I hope that in the new season, maybe you can recommend some other people to come on the show, so we can have more conversations about your hopes and involvement of Islam in Barbados. So
Yeah.
we really hope that that is something that we can do. Being a democratic, multicultural society that we purport to be, we have to definitely show the faces of all the people within the society. So, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what, the general question that I had given you before. What do you think is one of the more significant political events during 2020?
Yeah. So I think 2020 has definitely been a year that will be forever marked in our calendars, I think, because so many shifts and changes have occurred. And it's really interesting as we reflect now on some of what has happened. I think for us in Barbados, what stuck out in my mind is the throne speech that was delivered earlier in the year. And one of the aspects of the throne speech was an ambitious sort of goal for Barbados to become a republic by 2021. I think it, given the circumstances around COVID-19 and just uncertainty, it sticks out in my mind as something that's very ambitious, and what that will look like for Barbados. I mean, since that announcement, there hasn't been much discussion around what that process would be and what it would look like. So I'm interested as we go into 2021, in light of still dealing with COVID, how some of those promises that were made and some of those goals that were set will begin to take shape and formation as we move towards that November date.
Mm-hmm.
You want to follow up, Ayo? All right, so I'm gonna take I'm gonna take you a little bit.
So
go ahead.
Hannah, a show like this or shows like this, how do you think that they can help you to build wider awareness to the issues affecting the Muslim in our community or Muslim community in general, and really and truly in particular our Muslim sisters?
I think shows like this are important. It allows persons to offer their perspective and their opinions on aspects of political life. I think within Barbados, leadership has always looked similarly. And though we may have differences in government, I think in terms of how we look at Barbados and how they move forward, the differences in leadership are not as drastic as you would see perhaps in somewhere like America, where I know we would have discussed earlier on the show. So, I mean, being able to have representation in politics is very important. And I think shows like this allows us then to have that commentary behind some of these issues. Going back to my previous point about the fact that Barbados, some of the discussions that were brought up in the throne speech and some of the goals that were set for Barbados and what we're moving towards, what that looks like for me is a Barbados is definitely more inclusive, that looks to to deal with some of the challenges that have been plaguing us for a long time, and how do we begin to define our future. So I've seen that as a shifting point in sort of how we view ourselves and perceive ourselves, and now beginning to reshape what Barbadian society, what progress will look like and development will look like as we move forward, which is why I signify that as a very important moment, because until that point, I think young people did not begin to actively think, okay, what is my role in the leadership of this country? And now we're at a stage where we can progress to a level of leadership in Barbados that we have not been able to before. So for younger people especially, and persons from diverse backgrounds, it then brings the question into play, okay, there's now a space for me, and how do we begin to utilize and shape that space as we move into 2021, and as we move towards restructuring to be more aligned with becoming a republic and ensuring self-determination and so on.
Just to follow on very quickly from what the question Ayo just asked, and where your response was taking you, what can we as non-Muslims, right? Those of us who are non-Muslims, what can we do to ensure that we are that we can promote? What can we do to promote wider awareness of the issues affecting the Muslim community in general, and our Muslim sisters in particular? What are some, in addition to shows like this, what are some of the other things that we can do? We don't want to get out ahead of your community. We don't want to get out ahead of where you guys are at. What can we do to help? I guess is the question.
Yeah, so in fact, in how you framed the question, Terry, where you referred to sort of the concept of a non-Muslim, and I'm always referred to as a non-Christian. I think one of the important things that we first have to do is reflect on our own, our own values and how we speak about issues of inclusion. So for me, one of the things that I want to make very clear is, when we speak about the other, or especially other faiths, we don't refer to them as necessarily non-Muslim or non-Christian or non-Jew or whatever, but just persons of other faiths. And I think that allows us to be a bit more inclusive in our language and how we move forward. So I think by extension, that sort of, if we look at how we can begin to show solidarity with other persons of other faiths and other challenges and issues that may be faced at the community level, is to have greater sensitization and open your minds to learning. And I think when we learn, we look at all different angles of a story. And one of the things that I actually want to mention that kind of brings that into focus is during the issue of, where the government changed laws around religious dress and religious headwear, one of the local newspapers here in Barbados issued they wrote an article around the issue, and they spoke only to a Muslim male, and some of the information around why Muslim women dress the way that they do was centered around what a male's perspective was. And persons sort of just took that and ran with that and not come to the source themselves. Ask Muslim women, speak to us, talk to us, seek us out, and we're very present. So just being conscious of also some of the biases that perhaps the media may have, or some of leaders within our community may have, and recognizing that, and then always looking for different stories, looking for different sources, and seeking those out to be better informed, I think would be a great place to start.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, because as I told you when you were on last week, thank you so much for sharing your story, because your perspective is one that I've not heard, and it's one that we need to hear more from. Right? So I don't know if Deborah has anything to ask.
Well, certainly. It's no secret that 2020 has been a difficult year, particularly with COVID. But I'm curious as to what were some of the gains you could point to for 2020 that you would say, that has been a positive at least. You mentioned the law addressing the wear and identification. That's one example. But what other areas, maybe for women, maybe for the Muslim community, that you would say, hey, there's been a gain here despite the difficulties of 2020?
I think one of the gains is that I've seen is there has been a greater focus on the importance of mental health and tackling gender-based violence, particularly when we're faced with, crises or disasters, and the fact that these issues that we are vulnerable to, or more vulnerable to as a small island developing state, how they're expanded or, become more prominent when we're facing, these challenges. So I think 2020 allowed us to look at some of those deep-rooted inequalities that become much more prominent in cases where countries are put under duress or added stress. So I think that is a plus for 2020. I mean, both bad and good at the same time, but it allowed us to have some very important conversations around gender-based violence and mental health, so that going into 2021, I know that a number of non-governmental organizations are in conversation with relevant ministries around strengthening some of the structures around support, prevention, and just supporting survivors or perpetrators who exist within our society. So I think that has been an important, milestone, important achievement for us in 2020, given the circumstances.
Excellent. Farhana, thank you so much. Eat up a little bit here time, because
That's okay.
Yeah.
I don't mind giving way to Peter.
I know. So we just want to keep the program moving, but you know that I love talking to you, and I hope that we can do so again, as I've said numerous times before. I want to wish you good luck going into 2021, and good luck with your organization. Keep up the good work, and just keep doing everything that you've been doing.
Yes, keep coming back.
Thank you.
We need to hear more.
Thank you. I'll be here. I'll still tune into the rest of the show. So all the best.
Thank you.
All right, so you enjoy.
Great, gentlemen. We are moving along really nicely, I think.
Feels like fun. I feel
terrified to the show. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to begin with, but it's working out. And we're gonna have our next guest in now. He is Ryan Walters, first Vice President of the Democratic Labour Party. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Ayo, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
Hey, Ryan.
Having a good day?
Hey, yeah, good. Hi, Terry. Hi, everyone. A busy day. Housework. Christmas cleaning.
Oh, no.
You got trapped.
Yeah. How's everybody?
Very good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good.
So, thank you for joining us on our show before, and of course, we welcome back majority of the guests. This is our last episode for the season. So, thank you for coming back and having a short conversation with us. Of course, I asked the general question for you to talk about your most significant, to you, or from your perspective, political event this year. But before you answer that, of course, I want to ask you a question. What do you think was the greatest accomplishment for the Democratic Labour Party this year?
The greatest accomplishment. Mm-hmm. I never thought about it that way. Accomplishments are greatest. What I would say is that, yeah. I mean, for the Democratic Labour Party, it's taking one day at a time. We have a lot of work to do in-house and in the public domain, and I think we're getting there. We're doing what we're supposed to. Everyone is eagerly awaiting the news that they want in terms of candidates and so forth. But I think we're in good state. We've had another annual conference. Brother was elected over George, and I mean, whether that is good or bad, I mean, it's not for me to say, but it does say that there's something happening in the party, and that persons are seeing, or in their minds, our members are visualizing what they want the future of the party to look like in some form or fashion. You have Verilla's president, you have myself, Andre, vice presidents, and then there's a mix. So there's Ronald Jones and there's Steve Blackett. So and there was young Kimar Stewart for general secretary. So to me, it's a mix of young youthful persons with the experience, and we're moving forward.
Excellent. Okay, so what is, you can tell us now, what is your one political event worldwide that you thought was really significant?
Worldwide?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you said worldwide, or you just said political event?
I guess political event worldwide. It could be anywhere.
Worldwide, it could be anywhere.
Right. I think the Guyanese elections were the most significant, the controversy around that. Just how it played out, the forces behind it. I've never really paid it much attention in terms of elections in that territory. But, you know, it just, to me, it's something you need to pay attention to when you talk about democracy, when you talk about fairness around elections and different things. So to me, that was the most significant, and it definitely is something that, while we are not in that place in terms of Barbados, it's something that we need to constantly be aware that things can change overnight, and a person's motivation to do things that are not above board can also change overnight. So we need to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row when it comes to our political elections, general elections.
So Ryan,
You guys want to go ahead?
yeah, I'll ask one question. What are some of the priorities for 2021 for the Democratic Labour Party? So what are some of your priorities? We know you're in leadership. What are some of the priorities?
Yeah, I mean, our priorities are simple. Our priorities are to get our candidates out to the public domain. I know Verilla has mentioned that in January you should have some information on the first slate of candidates. So the priorities is really coming to the public with some candidates, coming to the public, using these candidates with some messaging to start to interact with the public domain and start to share our perspective, our views, whether it be from a futuristic perspective or whether we just discuss some of the things that are happening in the current economic environment that we do not agree with. But I think the priorities are definitely shaping up ourselves for an election, and that is getting candidates on the ground and getting into the community with these candidates and starting to, as we would say, rub shoulders. Yeah, like
as
that one.
Amir would say, right?
Borrowing a term. But hey, Ryan, question. What would you say were some of the criticisms and unwarranted criticisms that the Democratic Labour Party faced in 2020, and how would you respond to some of them?
Yeah, I think the major criticism I always have is that persons are fast to criticize us, relative to when we put opinions out in the press, whether we voice our concerns or dissatisfaction with some of the policies of the government or a lot thereof. I have a challenge with that approach because I believe that we deserve the opportunity to come to the public and we should be given an ear. I said that last time. That is, we need persons to listen to us, and we should not be discarded because of a perception of the past, you know. So that is my disappointment in terms of how we are meted out to from some of the public. But I think that has changed somewhat. Definitely has improved in terms of persons actually wanting to hear a little more, engaging a little more, especially with to me directly. And even when you track the comments on social media under the posts that come out, as a nation, Barbados today, you start to see some support behind some of the motives of the Democrat Labour Party. And before that was a far cry for what used to happen. So it's a step in the good direction. I think as we continue to mobilize and move forward, we would get more and more of that once we continue to pick the topics to speak on and speak on them as intelligently as we can. I think that, you know, we will continue to, I would say, win the hearts of people in terms of the ears and win the ears of the people going forward.
Okay, and Terry made mention of the priority of the Democratic Labour Party. I know you're the spokesperson for small business for the party. 2021, what would you say ought to be the priority of the government outside of COVID? What other priorities would you like the government to take focus on as the spokesperson on small business?
Yeah. Well, I mean, COVID presented itself with the opportunity to really, for the government to really embrace small business. Tourism was down to zero, and all was left was small business outside of tourism and big business, but local business in general. The government from inception, I can't say they have done one or two good things for small business, period. What we are faced with is that they've kind of facilitated some funding to startups and micro entrepreneurs by $5,000 grants to Trust Loan Fund. But I believe a small business is characterized as a company that earns less than $2 million or something like that, I believe. And so there's a host gamut of businesses that no support is given to, no emphasis is placed on. And even with the programs that will come out in the stimulus package, each time they have failed small business. We know about, I think there was about $60 million for small business in the first package. I think only about 5 million of that was disbursed. In the second run, they pledged some money again through speech. I think only 10 million of that was dispensed, but again, it was dispensed, I believe, to recapitalize the Trust Loan Fund and to give support to the other entity that lends, which is the Enterprise Growth Fund, Fund Access, right? So you have, but on the other hand, they have put $150 million into large businesses, primarily the hotel sector, for them to make themselves more profitable when the economy starts to turn. So the government has continually dropped the ball as it relates to focus on small business. In 2021, what we need to do as a country is to place some emphasis on developing business, small business to medium to large. And when we characterize a small business, it is not only the person that wants a $5,000 loan or a $10,000 loan, but it's a person that may be seeking $100,000 in finance and so forth to grow his business, to expand, to franchise, to open another outlet, to expand his portfolio. And you're not seeing a conversation around that. You're not seeing any direction in terms of how do we help businesses get from A to B. But what you're seeing is small sums of money going into some small persons who will predominantly have very small turnover, and collectively they might have some impact on the economy. But if we reach out and really focus a lot on small business people, which are people that earn a couple $1 million a year in turnover, then we get a little more benefit as well. So the focus for 2021 for the government is to really put some of that $150 million that is being offered to the BEST program into the small business persons in a strategic way. I spoke also about the technical support and how we can use the University of the West Indies program, Give Back program, to actually offer productive, consistent technical support to the small business industry who themselves are lacking finances and technical support. So if we are able to get these great minds into assisting small businesses and helping them develop, then that's a step in the right direction. We get the give back and we get the development of businesses, whether it's HR, accounting, IT, marketing, finance. We get this pool of resources and minds helping out entrepreneurs as we go forward.
Okay, Ayo, I think you may want to jump into that one, considering, you know, you're considered a small business. Your thoughts on that, Ayo?
My business as a small business, I think that I own a business. Size is not to be determined at this point.
The place doesn't matter.
I know it's about into being small, because then you remain there. Right, Ryan? I guess that's what we should be telling people.
Yes.
There you go. Ryan, what are your plans going into and by your plans I mean the Democratic Party? I don't want necessarily asking you for strategy or anything like that. But what are some of the priorities? Are you looking to attract more young people? What about potential current leaders? You know, things like that.
Ryan, if you want to give us your strategy, feel free to announce it here.
Right. Yeah.
And to ask a question about the Democratic Party, reconnecting to the masses via the labor movement. I have it right, Terry.
Yeah, right.
Because in the movement right now, you know, I think there's a view that it could take some attention somewhat. So I think, you know, so what about the Democratic Labour Party using that basically to try to reconnect with the masses?
Yeah.
Like that. What are some of the priorities going forward for 2021?
Yeah, but I believe we've already engaged in the labor market. The president was invited or was requested to meet with some of the workers in the hotel industry, and she's done so. And she's assisted where she could have. What we need going forward in terms of reconnecting to labor, though, is sensitization. And you know, we need to make sure we're speaking things that are real and things that are sustainable to the labor market, right? And well, we know that there's a lot of displacement and persons need their severance and so forth. I fully support that severance should be paid, and the government should, by all means, take whatever precautions are necessary to recoup this money from business. But I wouldn't seek to re-engage with labor in a way that is short term and short-sighted, because I think we are at a place now where we need to start to refocus persons, right? So that we can get them in the right mindset going forward. There are many people telling me today that they will never work at a hotel again. You know, they'll prefer not to be reemployed in the hotel industry. And you know, all I'm saying is that we need to sensitize persons of the importance of things, the role that they play, and then we need to make sure that the structures are in place actually support it. So the question is, like, we should always have access to national insurance funds for employees who are paying the fund. We should always have access to severance for persons who the government has to pick up the severance payments from the employers. So how do we then use, going forward, what legislation should we put in place to make sure that these funds are not continuously dipped into by governments, whether it be the LP or Democratic Party government. But these are conversations that we would need to have, because these are the things that will actually make labor more calm, more comfortable, want to come to work, and want to give. But when you have persons coming in and they don't know the future, their own future, and they've given years and years of service to a company or to industry, then that's where the challenges come in. That's where the frustration sets in. So you would get a very unhappy workforce, persons that will go back out to work and will determine that they're not going to give their all. You know, they're only going to give half of what they used to give because there's nothing in it for them. But as it relates to the 2021, as I said, re-engaging, whatever that means to individuals that have to re-engage, right? We have to get our people on the ground. Re-engagement for myself might be different for re-engagement of another potential candidate or our candidate himself or herself. But we just need to get on the ground and start working. There's not much I can say around that. We don't have a list of topics we need to talk about and all that, but we need to pick up the hot topics of the day. We need to start to formulate positions, and we need to get our people on the ground to start to engage with constituents that they plan to represent. It's as simple as that.
And you personally, what are your plans? Sorry, Ty.
No, go ahead.
Personally, my plans,
right?
business as usual for me. On the ground all the time in the constituency.
Yeah, okay.
We just had, yesterday, we had a very successful Christmas party for the kids. So that was pretty good. We had about maybe 70 kids there having a good time. So that's what it is for me in the community. Nationally, continue to talk about small business and other issues, and make sure that persons are represented in Barbados. My role as vice president as well is to make sure that the branches start to regain their strength and we start to move together as a team. So that's my focus. My focus are those three critical things, the constituency level, nationally supporting small business and other areas of interest, and then helping the party bolster its organs to move forward.
Okay.
One quick comment. One quick comment to you, Ryan, before you go. I do want to say this. I do think that you have been successful at doing what you're doing. I just want to make that comment. I do know from several individuals, like just in talking to them, that you're well received and well perceived. So you are a bright spark for the Democrat Labour Party, and we hope that more candidates and more individuals in leadership of the party will come out and engage with the public, because what you are doing is making a difference. So I just thought I'd just make that point to you.
It's funny that you say that, because I was literally going to tell Randy the same thing, that thank him for coming on this show and to really let his compadres know that this is a safe space for everybody.
It's not that safe, but okay. It's not that safe. Yeah. But no, I think everything happens in time.
Right.
And I mean, there's not enough time to talk about all the things, but again, it really has to do with how we view politically exposed persons. And I know these are things that we have to look at going forward, because there are a lot of persons, as I said before in our first session, that would love to come forward and would love to contribute, and they have the capacity to do so. But the political affiliations and the political exposure, it really hinders that, and so everything is timing. So you will see it. I know I have some very good comrades who can match me or even outdo me, and I know they will come in due course.
But I hope that they can see that we've been as fair to each person, regardless of affiliation.
Keep selling it.
Questions of everyone.
Keep selling it.
My comment wasn't specific to this show. In general, your outreach is making a difference. So
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks for your
All right,
support
thank you,
in
Ryan.
2020. We look forward to that in 2021. Also.
Yes, cool. All right, have a Merry Christmas. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
You as well.
All right.
Yeah, so Ryan is somebody else that I actually like talking to.
Steve.
I thought he was a good guest during the year also, without doubt. Right, so our next guest, because we're going to keep moving right along, I believe it is Dr. George Brathwaite. Can bring him on. Hey, Dr. Brathwaite.
Oh, good evening. How are you all doing?
We're great. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
And thanks for coming again.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for making your contribution in helping to make the show a success in its first season.
Appreciate it.
I want to say that the episode with you and Devron is the highest watched to date. The second highest watched is actually right now. Yeah, I just thought I should let you guys know that. You guys are the highest.
That's probably thanks to Devron.
Yeah, I was looking at the stats yesterday and I realized that. So, I'm sure, were you listening just now to Ryan?
I've been listening to all the contributors most of where. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. So what do you think that he had to, what do you think of what he had to say about the Democrat Liberal Party and moving forward as them moving forward as a party? And I answer this as a political scientist, yeah, of course.
I think that you can tell that he has a sincere interest in offering himself and the party looking overcome the debacle of the past. However, where I'm in disagreement with Ryan and the current strategy is this tend to appear as though they think that election will be called exactly 5 years from the last one. In other words, I do not necessarily see them operating at the pace which they should be operating at this point in time. In terms of, yes, you're saying that you deserve to be heard and you deserve not to be, or that person not to be overly critical. But those are things you earn, and you earn it by jumping into the water. You jump in the water, you cannot stay on the shoreline all day and hoping and wishing on serendipity. You need to make things work for you. And if it means that you have to do it perhaps zonal, perhaps in smaller groups as opposed to going large scale party, then you need to do that. You need to capture the imagination of the Barbadian people. And if you're not moving with haste to capture the imagination of the Barbadian people, then you will be left behind. The bus would have already passed when you think opportunity has come knocking your way.
So, Dr. Prophet,
Have
there been any achievements? Sorry, Ayo, but
go ahead,
have there been any achievements of the Democrat Liberal Party in the last, well, since the last election?
Yes, I would say certainly emerging from the St. George North by election, and some of the younger persons who mounted the platforms and some of the younger persons who were commenting on social media, etc., you see that there is an interest among young people. Whether they will be given the opportunities is another thing, and because it is clear, Prime Minister Mia Mottley is very strategic. He is quite assertive, and if she sees that there are young people in the Democratic Labour Party not being given the type of opportunities, I'm sure that some attempt will be made to co-opt. And that's a reality living in a small society where you want to give persons exposure and give them the opportunities, but to hold them back, it builds this is very frustration that Ryan was speaking of just now. So we have to see to what extent. Right now, what could be leading the discourse, or what should have been leading the discourse, certainly in the latter half of 2020, you needed to see the young Democrats out there. It takes the young Democrats to, if you want to call it, wipe the slate clean of what transpired between 2013 and 2018. That is where you need your young people, and you're catching some young persons. So you have to give them the exposure, give them the training. Indeed, in thinking about your general question to me, in terms of this year events and stuff, there were a number of issues that we could highlight, and several of them have been mentioned this evening. But emerging around all of that was a quote from over 50 years ago by John F. Kennedy, where John F. Kennedy indicated, he suggested, leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. If you're going to be carrying a political party where it has taken lots of damage, reputational and another damage, financial, everything like that, you have to learn from the oppositional leader, which meaning you're learning from the prime minister, you're learning from the past prime minister or prime ministers, and you are looking to see within your own self the types of strengths and weaknesses that you carry and how you can make the necessary adjustments to capture that same imagination, so that you see that leadership and learning, it becomes a process that is constantly revolving, constantly reshaping itself, constantly, you're building up always a new synthesis and getting to somewhere higher and better and more progressive. And I think the Democratic Labour Party, to my mind, they're a bit lapse or largely lapse in that regard, certainly in terms of what the public is seeing. I could be saying this and they could be doing many of these things that I'm suggesting at a very internal level. But at the end of the day, you have to market yourself, and it is the public that has to get the buy-in. And unless that comes forward early in 2021, I think we could be looking at elections prior to 2023, but the Democratic Labour Party might be preparing for end of 2023, and that would be too late.
All right, George. So one of our previous guests, Peter Wickham, made reference to the fact that there's a real possibility of 30 Love by the next election. My question to you is, do you foresee the next election being more competitive than his perspective? Do you think that we're going to go back into our corners of, the St. Phillips being for the Dems, and the St. John's being for the Dems, and the St. Michael's being for the Bs? And to what extent do you think the next election will be competitive?
It will be competitive to the extent that leadership starts to show itself in the same way that Ms. Motley is demonstrating leadership at national, regional, and international levels. Unless you are going to pivot to be able to challenge the BLP's leadership, the Democratic Labour Party or any other party or a combination of all the other parties are likely to be whitewashed again. That is one, we've seen it. We've seen it with the COVID, how Colonel Bostic spearheaded our response. We've seen it in terms of how we're managing several areas of the economy and society, even where people are hurting. I think that the current administration, if it is, I've seen some cracks, and this was exposed again from the St. George North. And the lesson for me was not so much Tony Moore, the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union, but what emerged was the sense of skepticism regarding labor all around. And we are now seeing that there's beginning to be an uptick in terms of industrial relations and labor issues. And that is something that the Barbados Labour Party will have to put their pulse on. And it's something that all the other parties would have to demonstrate some form of leadership. It goes beyond mere criticism. As Peter was suggesting, it goes in what type of alternative programs, what alternative approaches can you put into the national forum so that the national discourse changes to reflect that you show a caring and an understanding of people displaced because of COVID in terms of work, high unemployment among the youth, and the fact that people want decent work and decent wages. And unless we really see a national leadership dealing with these types of issues, I think those are the types of things that can perhaps derail the Barbados Labour Party, although there is no doubt that the leaders' coattail is very long. And at the same point in time, it is the things that will hold back. the other parties, particularly the Democratic Labour Party, where it seemed as though it comes across sometimes as though the criticisms are just in terms of spectacle, like how the leadership operated with in the recent tourism sector and stuff like that. Yes, it is something that Mr. Pisa, to avoid any perception of spectacle, what she should have been doing is demanding audience with the Prime Minister, with the Minister of Labour, with the same Tony Moore and the various unions, and saying, hey, this is the Democratic Labour Party position that supports these workers. This is what we want to hear. We want to hear some of the answers to these problems. These things have been perennial. Let us work together and put an end to it. So it is not always about the criticism. It is how much you're willing to reach across in terms of your stewardship now, extend the hand and to be part of that solution and leadership.
So, Dr. Brockman, would you argue that the current labor environment facing the Barbados government, would you argue that this is the biggest challenge that they're going to be facing going into the future, beyond COVID? Managing the follow of this labor relations, and
yes,
does it present opportunity? Go ahead. Sorry.
When you take the issues surrounding NIS, when you take the issues surrounding the aging population, when you take the issues surrounding the CSME and whether there are attitudinal changes in terms of factor production, social integration in terms from a regional standpoint, allowing the ease and the mobility of labor. We were talking about the labor market. How do we maximize those things that emerge in national labor markets to bring them to the framework of a regional labor market to the extent that we are able to help ourselves? Because we've seen that, we've demonstrated that we can cooperate with COVID, etc. Yes, there are some issues, but we've demonstrated that we can cooperate to get that greater good. And one of the things that in terms of this greater good is how do we build resilience? How do we strengthen the hand of our young people, our young entrepreneurs, all these persons that passing through university where the educational bill is quite high, and yet we hear within civil society questions about whether they're getting adequate returns on investment. So all of these things to me are very much linked, and now is the time. You have to use the crisis to maximize what you can do going forward. I don't know if I answered you yet, Terry. I hope I did.
You took it very broad. I was going to be, and you did answer the question. I was going to zero in though. I was going to follow up with this in the same vein. This question. So the current environment in Barbados, the fallout from the layoffs due to COVID, present an opportunity for the Democratic Labour Party to reconnect with the labor movement. And I'm thinking about organized labor, not just the workers, but the unions themselves. What do you think is the opportunity scope for that? And do you think that opportunity for the Democratic Labour Party has been somewhat curtailed by Mrs. Moore being co-opted by Barbados Labour Party and hoisted into the House of Assembly?
I think I will start with Miss Tony Moore.
Mm-hmm.
I think Miss Tony Moore has a lot of tenacity, and if it becomes in full glare, I think you will see her put forward advanced position. I do not think she would compromise herself. The lady has integrity.
Mm-hmm.
However, the broader picture when it comes to labor and what can be done is how do you manage, because it's something that has to be managed, uncertainty and skepticism. How do you eliminate perceptions? These things, real or imagined, that are supposed to be super problems. within the context of the working environment, wherein you have persons suggesting that it is only certain types of persons that benefit in Barbados. And we get rid of some of the classism that even exists within political parties and within trade union movement and within the capitalist sector. So it is, how do you diffuse these? And I'm thinking that, again, one of the ways that we have to embrace each other is we have to have more forums for activities within civil society itself. And I'm sure that Dr. Christina Hines will perhaps mention this when she speaks. Might get that chance to say something on it. But it is a matter of how you can bring all these various elements to a point where even if you're not getting total consensus, that you're reaching levels of consensus never previously achieved in Barbados, just for making Barbados better. Barbados, I'm proud of my country. I'm proud of my Caribbean. But to me, there's something about Barbados that should always want to demonstrate the type of leadership and the learning. And that is why I pull these themes together in the context of 2020. Even for me, in terms of my personal grief, there are lessons. There are lessons to be extracted in terms of, you know, how much must I or am I willing to sacrifice to make sure that my community can grow, to make sure that my village can grow, to make sure that some of my friends that lost jobs, etc., can still be able to take on something to a family. So it is, how can we help each other? How can we hold hands, even though we see different pathways to the goal? How can we, without absolute rancor, how can we get hold and say, well, look, we're going to take this approach, we're going to walk hand, and I'm going to respect your view. I'm not going to take your road, but I'm going to respect your view. And I hope that you will respect mine and be able to walk together. And that is what Barbados needs. We don't want more partisanship and divisiveness. Of course, that comes out on the political platforms. But, you know, 2 years after a general election and you're only agreeing with a person if they're speaking from the platform of your political party, we don't need that. We need you to be speaking from a platform of Barbados. And when the time comes to the party politics and the party engineering, let that happen. That is natural.
And we couldn't have said it better. That's what we need in 2020, definitely.
And 2021.
2021.
2020,
Yeah.
For unity and 2021. So yes, I definitely agree with you, Dr. Brath. Dr. Brath, thank you so much for coming on. I know that it's a difficult time for you, so I am absolutely grateful that you took the time to come back and spend a couple minutes with us. And also thank you for helping to build our show for this first season with your contribution, your spirited contribution.
I thank you very much, and I wish you and Terry all the best, and Devron. And I look forward to having an invitation and coming back in 2021. If 2021 threw some good bunkers and yorkers at me, I'm coming back with a broad bat in 2021 because life is for the living. Life is for the living, and I'm going forward.
Definitely. So thank you. You have a wonderful evening. And,
cheers.
Thanks,
All right, George. Always a pleasure.
All right. Cheers. Thank you all. Have a good one.
You too.
Good luck.
Yeah,
Happy Christmas.
All the best.
Cheers.
I actually have some other questions for George, but that's for next year, I suppose.
You'll be back.
All right. He's not off as yet, Terry.
That's okay.
Lovely. All right, so great conversation. We'll have our next guest, Dr. Hines. Thank you guys for staying with us. I know we're not taking a lot of questions from the audience this evening, but it's because
Do we have any questions from them?
Program, not really. We just have some comments People are basically enjoying the show. Thank you, Sandra Atwell. Sandra.
Hi, Dr. Hines. I love your hat.
Oh, thanks.
Looking all festive.
That's nice.
Hi.
How are you,
It's
Dr. Hines?
ironic. I thought we all were supposed to be wearing hats today, but apparently not.
I ordered mine and it never came.
I hear wouldn't keep quiet. I wasn't able to get one, so we kind of squashed that. Anyhow, welcome back, Dr. Hines. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
How's the book coming? How's it going? Is it going well?
Oh, you mean the sales?
Yeah.
I hope it's going well. I
Feedback.
mean, it's been on sale recently for a really amazing price, $16.99 US. I was shocked. So hopefully people are buying it and enjoying it. And if they're not, I would love them to tell me.
Sure they are. Okay, what's next on the horizon for you? You have any other books coming out? Is there anything else you're working on?
Yeah, I'm working on some things, and I guess that is a good thing, and it can also be a little bit problematic when you're working on more than one thing. But yeah, I'm trying to put my head down and do some research, both on domestic politics and international. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, good luck to you on all of your projects.
Research.
All right, so
Tell me
Terry.
about it. No, just commenting, nothing. Go ahead.
You were not in a research struggle. I understand.
Of course, yeah, it's publish or die or shot.
Fair enough. Well, you want to go ahead and tell us what the political events of 2020 that were significant to you mostly?
Well, the most significant political event for me is actually coronavirus, COVID-19. I was surprised nobody said it. Because when you said it was coming towards the end, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to write down a list and see if I cross off. But the top of my list is still here. And I say coronavirus, COVID-19, because I come to political science from international relations background. So for me, it is very, well, obviously we have all been personally affected by this. But it's also an interesting case study when we think about conventional international relations and the way in which it tended to focus on violent conflicts as being heavily politically relevant and less so on issues such as health issues. And we have seen these becoming increasingly important, especially with so-called globalization, the movement of people. So we see diseases, illnesses, and so on, crossing borders more and more. And clearly, this is the first time in all of our lifetimes where we've had a global pandemic, and we have come to see how significant things like your healthcare system and the ability for people to access the healthcare system is indeed political, and it's not just about your domestic politics. It's also about, in this case, the health and safety of the entire planet. So it has been quite interesting for me to observe from that regard. It's also been interesting in terms of thinking about different types of states. So sometimes I teach a course on development to undergraduates, and there is a part in there where we talk about the weak and the strong state. When I'm talking about weak and strong here, I don't mean that the United States is strong, as in powerful, and maybe we in the Caribbean are weak, as in we don't have a lot of military, economic power, and so on. When I say that, I mean powerful, strong and weak in terms of the relationship between the state and the society. And what has really been interesting is places like the United States of America, where we can say that the state is weak in terms of its ability to control the population. They have had significant difficulties addressing COVID-19. And places with the so-called strong state, where your government can tell people to do things and they will do things, is where you tend to see more control. And there are extremes of this. So we are in like the democratic form of that, whereas China, for instance, would be a different kind of political form, Cuba. But where there's this relationship and the state can tell people that you need to stay home and they will comply, we see different outcomes. We also see different outcomes in places where there is socialized healthcare. meaning that people have easier access to healthcare without having to pay at the point of accessing these services, right? So it's been very interesting. And also interesting to me is the whole, you know, how it affects everything that has happened in the world. So when we talk about elections, how different countries have had to hold their elections in modified ways, how we've all worked differently. We have, you know, changed the form of our lives. We have different kinds of security concerns, so that things like cybersecurity are all the more important to us now because we're doing everything online. And these are very political actions with very political implications as well when we consider things like who is controlling Zoom, who has access to all of our meetings at work, and you know, our data and private information. So it's been a really interesting time for me, sometimes obviously upsetting, but when I put on my thinking cap, not this cap, the you know, intellectual cap, it has thrown up a lot of things to really consider.
So wearing your international relations cap, though, can you see coming out of COVID? Do you see like a strategy for the Caribbean? Like, is there some grand strategy for us, or are we just, you know, several boats?
Oh my goodness. I wish there were a grand strategy. I hear people who are so excited about the 12-month welcome stamp and changes to immigration legislation that can come from this. I mean, and although I can understand the logic behind it, it makes sense if you want to get money into the country. We have been very critical of other similar programs where we say that people are selling passports. And if we strip away all of the fancy language and public relations and marketing and so on, this is going in that direction in Barbados. And we have long said that we are not moving in that direction. And I'm really eager to see these proposed amendments relating to immigration, not because I'm xenophobic, but because I am not in favor of a system where we are basically trying to get people to come here to bring their money. And I don't know what else comes with that. And then there are other people in this region who we should be allowing to come here, and maybe they don't have enough money to get the welcome stamp, right? So they could get the 6 months that you can get. Can you imagine that a CARICOM national can stay here for less time than someone coming on a 12-month welcome stamp? I mean, there's some things in there that I find very contradictory that I think we really need to explore. And I think in terms of our approach to development, we need to really start thinking. I don't have the answers, but I think we need to start thinking about approaches to development that are less dependent on what people outside are interested in doing. So if people outside are digital nomads, then we can make some money. But when they decide that they're done with that, then what? Being duck guts again, right? So, I mean, those kinds of things, I think we really need to, I'm not saying not to do it, but we need to be very aware of what we are signing up for and not believe that these things are going to save us. We really need to have some other kinds of options apart from those that are heavily externally reliant.
I actually agree with you there. I've always had a slight problem, even though that part of my livelihood depends on tourism. I've always had a slight uncomfortable thing about the way we practice tourism, the way we export our tourism product. But that's a conversation for when we can have a longer discussion on it.
Well, I think my time is up, we are all, isn't it?
No.
We have 8 minutes. Keep going.
Oh, okay.
So, question, Dr. Hines. So we have, you mentioned COVID-19 as the major concern for you for 2020. And you mentioned some states are doing a better job at managing it for various reasons than others. At the global level or the international level, how would you assess some of the international communities and organizations' response to COVID? What were some of the pitfalls and what were some of the bright spots in their response at the international level as well as the regional level?
I think there has been some criticism of the World Health Organization. I'm not sure if it is warranted fully, because it was a very difficult situation. And as we have all said, this is something we haven't experienced in our lifetime. There were criticisms about whether information was being released in a timely manner from China. so that this would not have become a global pandemic. These are things that I think we really need to look into, and not from the kind of Donald Trump way that's just calling it the China virus, but really thinking about having early responses to things that are happening around the world because of how things spread with the movement of people and goods and everything else. So I think we do have to have some kind of earlier warning system, if you want to call it that, in the area of health to address these kinds of things. One country that I think that was very interesting was Finland. There has been a lot of discussion about women leaders being very effective in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think there may be some truth to that. What I thought interesting though is this Prime Minister of Finland, she's actually 34 years old, the youngest Prime Minister in the world, and Finland has done quite well in terms of their ability to contain COVID-19. And that really is a lesson, I think, for all of us about the way in which perhaps we can trust younger leadership and people who may not have the experience of Joe Biden. Not to say that he, you know, will not be a good leader, because he very much, maybe. But, you know, we have the whole spectrum of people who have talents and abilities. And I think that we need to start thinking differently about who can lead and why people should get to lead, because it can have implications for the entire world. I know that's me being a kind of international relations optimist, but I do think that we are heavily connected now, and poor leadership in some parts of the world will affect us in other places.
What about how 2020 has affected civil society organizations? You know, that's your specialty. So it would definitely, before you go in another few minutes, I will let you to give some insight on that.
Well, civil society organizations have been hard at work, because this is the kind of time when people rely on each other. So we can talk about civil society in terms of society, and we can also talk about this in terms of the organizations. So even just now when I was listening to Dr. Brathwaite speak, and he was talking about, you know, helping those in his community, his village, and so on. This is how we see civil society really coming into action. Then we can think of the other organizations that have done things like deliver hampers and raise money. And in these times, we really do start to see that we do have civil society and civil society organizations in Barbados and the region. And whenever there is a significant crisis, these organizations, as well as people who may not be affiliated directly with an organization, have been very useful in the Caribbean in ensuring that we do not all suffer more than we need to. So if we did not have some of these organizations that have gone out of their way, I don't know where we would be. One of my favorite areas is with respect to gender. And what I have seen is that the women's organizations in Barbados have been very active. I was really happy to hear Farhana last week, as well as today again. And during this period of lockdown, not just in Barbados, but around the world, what we've seen is these spikes in domestic violence, gender-based violence in all of its different forms. And if we look at Barbados, there are not that many places that you can seek assistance outside of the police if they're not in civil society. So a lot of the hotlines that were available first for intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, domestic violence, however you want to term it, these were from civil society organizations, and they predated COVID. These did not have to be set up to respond to this. But certainly a lot of them were overwhelmed with calls. And again, we see how these organizations in which people do not get paid become very important in our societies, even though they don't always have a voice in some of our governance processes. I said a lot.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just want to follow up on that. I just want to the point about like for Hannah and her coming out, and the role that organizations like hers, like the Association of Muslim Ladies, they play in helping to address some of these same issues. I just want to like reiterate that point that you made. And
things like Black Lives Matter. We saw these protests calling for the removal of Nelson. All of these, again, came from civil society as well. And we have seen some responses. And I don't think this is just a COVID-19 response, because we've had people calling for this for decades now, right? So we see a level of persistence paying off. I think we need not to underestimate these organizations that exist in our societies, because they do help us with, we just saw the Human Development Index being released, and Barbados has done quite well once again. And without these organizations, without people helping each other, we would be a lot worse off in terms of so many things. People being able to eat, having somewhere to live, sending the children to school, clothes. There are so many things that we do not see in some of our national economic statistics, for instance, that contribute to our economic well-being. So, you know, the well-being of the country, as well as well-being measured in other ways.
Yes, you can read all about it. You can read all about it in Dr. Heinz's new book. Go ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely important, not just in helping, you know, doing the helping themselves, but also in calling attention to the situation. I think that is of great importance too, because a lot of time it's the pressure from these organizations that forces the governments to act. So that is also huge. Dr. Heinz, thank you so much.
Thank you too. I really applaud you all for this show. It has been very interesting, and I wish you the best for the rest of the year. Hope to see you next year.
Yeah, we hope to have you back next year.
Certainly.
All right, I look forward to the invitation. Take care.
All right.
All right, Dr. Heinz, enjoy.
Bye. Bye.
And we are making it like we got through this. Can you believe we got through this? We have one more guest left. Like, we got through this, Terry. I'm not gonna celebrate yet. Well, let's just invite our next guest, Dr. Tennyson Joseph.
You jinxed it. Just kidding.
Oh, go ahead and talk too quickly. Good afternoon, Dr. Joseph. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Is your voice okay?
Yes, everything is all right. I'm not getting hi, everyone. I'm not getting a chance to see what my system looks like because I'm here for the first time. So I'm seeing you for the first time. So I'm seeing myself for the first time because I was in your waiting room waiting to bring me on, right?
You're fine.
Okay.
You look fine.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming on. And I should give you a special thanks because you actually opened this show for us and set the standard quite high, I think. So I think a large portion of our success may be owed to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll accept that. I'll accept that humbly.
So how's the book doing?
It's okay. I think we were sold out at the Caville bookshop. So I think the next task would be to try to get more copies in there. But I think so far so good. I'm getting a lot of people asking me to get them. So I have to put myself in touch with the publisher. So the fact that they're calling for it is a good sign. So I'm quite happy with it so far.
Yeah, I think myself and Ayo might be responsible for the bookshop and you selling out because I know we got the last 2 copies that were there.
Okay, and I thank you, Terry, because you're now showing me that I'm somewhere in an office in Durham. So I'm right behind you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You've actually globalized the book. Thank you.
Oh, goodness. All right, so you were listening for most of the show, I believe?
Yes, I caught George and Christina. Yes, which leaves me with absolutely nothing to say because they've said everything that needed to be said. So I saw Christina counting down her minutes and telling you that she had 8 minutes left and so forth. So you all were milking her for every last drop. So that means that there's nothing left for me to say to you tonight.
There's always more for you to say.
Christina is just polite. She was trying not to go over her time. All right, so you know the one I'm gonna ask you about the most significant political event this year for you. What do you think? An event that was certainly historical, history making, really, or changing. As far as you're concerned, if you can think about one or two. You're the last guest, so we guess we have a little bit of leeway.
Right, so I think like Christina, it's not so much an event, but the reality of COVID. That to me was the very, very, very big thing. And we can't escape, we cannot ignore it. What I saw, even down to the very end, almost every event that took place in 2020, or let's say after March or so, was kind of overarched by the COVID situation. And coming down towards the end, we have this situation with the labor upheavals. And very often from where I stand, the way I analyze things, it is moments of conflict that really tell me more about what a society is like rather than moments of stability. Because very often stability implies force. So we are held together by force, but the force is so subtle and so strong that it doesn't appear, it's so stable that we don't see the politics in it. But when there are moments of conflict, as we saw towards the end, those are the times when we can actually see, that's when the layers have been pulled back. So you pull back the layers and you see exactly what the society is really like. In other words, it is in moments of crisis that you really know what a society is like, rather than in moments of stability. So I think, and I'm saying all of that to make the point about COVID. So I heard the last comments from Dr. Hines, and are you referring to tourism? I don't think Dr. Hines mentioned tourism directly, but it was implied in her discussion when she was talking about relying on external determinants to say what we should do as critical. I think our whole economy, and it's not just last year or 2 years ago, when we were coming down towards the end of primary production, I'm referring to bananas, sugar, and rum, the almost natural and logical thing was let us move full scale into tourism. At the height of the 2008 financial crisis, one of the things that I kept hearing from even the central bank governor, the argument was a very clear one, that because it is the most obvious and strongest foreign exchange earner, we must put our emphasis on tourism. And even now with COVID, where we witness a crisis that we had never anticipated before. You just have to see the shortfall in tourism revenue, the way the hotels closed down, the hired car companies, everything came to a standstill because no flights were coming into the country. And still, the discussion is still not thinking beyond tourism. So the event, I would say, is really the reality of COVID, but that reality of COVID is showing up so many things. So we actually at a critical juncture. And by critical juncture, I mean we can go in two directions. So we can either become a more oppressed and failing society, or we can use the moment for greater doors and windows for liberation and freedom. I certainly think, based on what I'm saying here, if we continue to strengthen and to argue for tourism and to leave it unchanged, we would have missed the moment. Now the workers, I heard one of your guests, I forgot to mention him because I didn't hear him speak, Ryan, talking about how workers were saying they're done with tourism and they've given all the, these are actually indications of a moment of crisis. Of course, Ryan, being the politician, wants us to rescue it. In other words, he's trying to say, let's not be so negative. But people like me who have a broader sense of how societies move will not look at it in a way to suggest how we resolve it, but we think, what does it mean for a future? So people are now saying, Lenin used to say that the poor vote with their feet. What people do in a concrete sense tells you what they're actually doing. So there is, in fact, clear and incontrovertible evidence that the tourism, the structure of the system has failed irrecoverably. Our technocrats may want to recover it and save it, our economists and so on, but the reality is, and I'm referring to the empirical reality, is that it has collapsed, it has definitely collapsed. And so, in terms of looking forward, one wants to see, and that's where the discussion about civil society and societal pressures come in, what next? Now, of course, those changes don't happen overnight. Now, they always put a label of idealist on you when you speak the way you do. Idealism is a kind of it's a kind of offhanded way of dismissing what you're saying as perhaps correct, but impractical. But I don't like the word idealist, because what I'm really saying is, I'm not saying something will happen tomorrow or something will happen next week. I'm saying the indications of what we are seeing now are real, and we now have to identify what can be done about it. What can be done about it? I can say definitely the future rulers of our country in 2050 or 2060 will have to think of things beyond tourism. That's a reality. So that's not idealism, that's just or let's put it the other way around, and I've already insisted on that. If we are going to stick with tourism, let us do it in a way that it has not been done before. That's where the Black Lives Matter discussion comes in. That's where the local empowerment, these are not far-fetched things. So for example, we are saying we cannot be putting an entire country hostage. Government can't be pumping money into tourism when it is run by a few expatriate old planter class types, and there are people who have skills, there are people who have other value-added inputs they can make to a tourism product that are local and are homegrown and so forth, and we have not structured an economy around them. These are the kind of things that I would say are the concrete ways we should be thinking about those things. And that has nothing to do with idealism, or that has to do with reading the tea leaves as you see them, understanding how politics operates, because how politics operates is that politics is looking to always side with the interest of the strong, but at the same time you have undercurrents that are always looking to undermine. That is the way, that's how my methodology operates. Okay, so that's probably what separates me from other people who you hear speak. We agree on everything because we are all Caribbean nationals together with the same upbringing, the same outlooks. What separates us are our methodological understanding of how social change takes place and so forth, right? So that I think is the big moment. I think the moment is a very exciting one because we have seen things that in our lifetimes we had never seen before. If somebody were to tell me 5 years ago that we would be in a country where for about 8 to 9 months, no planes could land in a country, or we were being told Americans can't come to the Caribbean, or English people are not allowed to come to the Caribbean, I would say impossible. If I were being told that children will not be going to school, children will be home because there is some life-shattering, objective, structural reality out there, and we now have to start to think of new ways of doing things, of working and so forth, I would say, oh, you read Marx. You would have been dreaming about Marx to see that. But I lived in my lifetime, I saw it, and Marx had said so very simply that the material base transformed itself to such a point that other things begin to fall apart and we make adjustments to it. So I know I'm talking a little excited, but I'm very, 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 very excited and happy about COVID because when Marx was writing his treatise, he was talking about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat coming to points of conflict. And he never dreamt that the system itself would, because when I say the globalization itself, the very system of globalization has meant that something which started somewhere in China, in a matter of months, spread throughout the entire world and brought the world economy to a standstill. So that world economy having come to a standstill, people are now reflecting on what is to be done. Of course, one of the short answers was, let's find a vaccine. So again, that is, in other words, that is the kind of way in which we'd say, let's preserve the system by finding a vaccine, and by 2021, by around August 21, everything will go back to normal. And that is really that was the Trump's response. That's why he was on his warp speed thing, and he wasn't listening to he didn't want to hear anything. I guess that was his response about healthcare and wearing masks. We are going to the same scientists that they were blasting all over the place. They will find a cure. They would find a vaccine and so forth. What I do know though about how society functions, vaccine or no vaccine, and again we don't even know what the actual outcome will be. We like Dr. Hines, we do international relations, so we're expecting the same historical forces to take place when America and England and Finland and Norway get the vaccine, and they vaccinate 100% of the population by around April next year. All the way down in 2022, we'll have Africa and other parts of the world still trying to come to terms with that. Okay, but that's a different story altogether. The point I'm really making is, vaccine or no vaccine, the world would have changed. The world would have changed, right? So all the questions raised about tourism will not disappear because you found a vaccine. In fact, the very administration of the vaccine would mean that states would have to do things that I heard Dr. Hines talking about socialist states and market-driven states. They will all engage in socialist healthcare to resolve the COVID crisis. They would all. The same way, after the 2008 financial crisis, they all engaged in the state. Imagine the USA took over motor car companies. Capitalist USA, under Obama, Bush first and Obama second, nationalized the production of cars. You understand what I'm trying to tell you there? And so in other words, they embrace the same way they embrace socialism the way a night stalker embraces a prostitute. So you go, you grab her for 10 seconds in the dead of night, and as soon as you solve your problem, you go back to say, let's give it back to General Motors and so forth, right? So the point I'm making, they're going to have to use socialist methods to solve the COVID crisis by way of making they've all said it's free. So that is why England can be so fast about it, because England has a national health service and so forth. So the point I'm making is we have concrete evidence that free market norms are not necessarily what the neoliberals tell us that they are. And in moments and that's a typical Benthamite kind of argument that the greatest happiness for the greatest number, you do a calculation in terms of how much state to do. But the crap about private sector-led growth and the state is bad, that nonsense will have to come to a stop in relation to that COVID moment. And there are other things that will come to a stop too. So I'm very, very happy that even you can call it God if you want, through COVID at us, in a moment when we were all going down that route about, the states have collapsed and so on and so forth. So we now see that the sometimes human beings and the well-being of human beings come take greater precedence over private exchange and private capital. And so, in fact, in the early days of COVID, I'm not sure you all heard it, there were actually some old members of the American Congress who would say, well, we can die for the system. Can you imagine that? They were saying, well, since it's only affecting old people, that was the initial, I call it idealist bourgeois claim about it. So since it's only affecting old people, let the old people die off. And I actually heard a congressman saying, well, I'm going to die. Because that is how ideological things work. You prefer to die for a system. Imagine Darwin told us the most instinctive, natural response to anything is self-preservation. And we are so warped in our thinking about the system is more important than us. That we can die, let the old people die so that capitalism can continue. Of course, as COVID went on, we realized it wasn't just the old people, it was actually killing more and more people. And I still think, even with the vaccine, we have to give it some time to really see what the vaccine will do and what it can do and so forth. So we can either be at the end of COVID, or we may very well be in a kind of new situation that may last longer. But I leave that for the scientists to tell us, and I also leave that for time to tell us. But what I do know is those things affect social relations. So we can't just wish it away. Those things all affect social relations, and our job is to study how it affects social relations, understand its impact on institutions, on culture, on behavior. And our job further is not to be idealistic about it, not to say the wrong things about it, or think the wrong things about it, or think about it in the wrong way, but to always think about it based on where you stand on the political spectrum. So where I stand on the political spectrum, I always think about what it means for human liberation, what it means for people who I identify with, a population that was enslaved and taken into captivity and is still facing historical, wherever they are, immiseration and exploitation, what it means for their betterment. I don't care about how other people think about it. I only know who I stand for, what I stand for, how I think about it. So when I open my mouth, what you will hear from me is how I'm thinking about it from that point of view. And I'm always trying not to be caught up in any false understanding of reality, to always understand it from my point of view. You may not like it, but that is, I'm trying to understand it from that point of view. So you will not have me saying things like, the workers have to stop striking. Because if I were to say that, I would not be speaking as someone who is speaking in the interest of a worker. I'd be speaking as someone who has some other interest, but not necessarily the interest of the worker. So people are now going home without severance pay, and you're telling them they shouldn't be striking, or they shouldn't be saying that tourism is a waste of time and that they have been betrayed and so forth. But they're going home without severance pay and so on and so forth. And the people who do that to them are getting away scot-free. And the system works in such a way as to allow those people to get away scot-free. And yet you say we shouldn't say those things. But they have a voice too, and their voice is a legitimate voice. So the intellectual cause himself, someone who speaks and thinks on their behalf, must do so legitimately, think on their behalf and to articulate on their behalf.
COVID has really shown up a lot of the, as much as we were saying earlier, that it has brought communities together and it has brought a lot of the civil society organizations and probably some rose out of COVID. It's also shown up a lot of individualism within the system also, the people who are refusing to wear masks. I'm not a scientist either, but I believe that these new strains of COVID that we're seeing is really the result of people refusing to wear masks and really protect themselves, protect the society at large by protecting themselves. Because they're thinking, well, it's my right, it's my individual right to not wear a mask if I don't want to, and this kind of really selfish ideals. But what do you think, or what do you see, especially in the Caribbean, some of the opportunities really coming out of the entire COVID situation right now? And I ask you this because I know that when I answer this question, you will look at it in a different way to perhaps a politician if I ask him about the opportunities coming out of COVID. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So let us say things like people's greater freedom in terms of their work, their employment. That's the most important thing in a human being's life. That you by the sweat of your brow you should eat bread. So therefore we work, and the work is what defines everything else, particularly in the kind of economic system that we live. So look at something like how we control our time. So people who work in the private sector will say to me, for example, that now they want us to stay home. Before, when we took 5 minutes to go out. In other words, what I think should happen is for unions to start redefining what is labor time. Because that's always the critical thing. What is that is the critical thing. That is why we have something called an 8-hour day. Again, a lot of people who, even the union, don't understand that. Why do we celebrate May Day every year? Because on that day we won the right to make a working day an 8-hour day. Before that, you had all kinds of things. You had, during slavery, it was from sunrise to sunset and so forth. So that thing which we call working for somebody else, how we dispose of our labor time, is critical. All struggle revolves around that. Of course, people in gender and other things quite rightfully say that there are other types of struggle, and those are very important too. When people like me say that, we're not dismissing other types of struggle, but we say it is perhaps, and we all agree, one of the most important facets of our struggle has to do with how we dispose of unnecessary labor time. Now I'm trying to answer your question, Ayo. So look at our unions. So right now I'm working at home. I'm using my electricity. I'm paying for my Wi-Fi. There's no time between my sleep time, my wake up time, my work time. I have no clock to punch and so forth. I think our unions need to start including those things on the bargaining table. So I'm always talking about what is greater realms of freedom. So in my paycheck now, because when you get your paycheck, Marx is to say, what you get paid for your self-reproduction. So when I get my paycheck, I have to pay my light bill, my water bill, and so on. Right now, we should be saying, no. We're working at home. So somebody has to, I don't want to attack any employer, but one with which I'm very familiar is saying to us, the air conditioning bills have gone down. The light bills have gone down. The water bills have gone down. And in a crisis where, again, I'm not mentioning any employer, where the normal intake has gone down, there was no real major bashing of the finances because all those other things stable off. You might have to guess who that employer is. Of course, the other people now, the workers are at home, using electricity and so forth. So perhaps if our unions are listening to us, these are the kinds of demands. So that's an opportunity. Marx used to talk about, in that future, I would fish in the morning, criticize in the evening. Now, when Marx wrote that in the German ideology, we say, what a madman. He's a madman. But he did say, in the future, I would be so many things. I can be a musician at home in the evening. I could write poetry, as opposed to our great grandfathers who had to go to work under somebody's whip and so on. But our unions can't just get caught and say, the same way they made the old traditional demands. We have to find ways in which so what's the difference between home and work? The spaces, how much, so things like flexi time, which our workers used to demand. People in management know what I'm going to talk about. All traditional employers with a slave mentality couldn't understand flexi time. I have to get my child from school at 2 o'clock. I have to drop my child at the women. That's a gender question too. I have to get my child home to class in the morning. I can't come to work for 8:30. Give me flexi time. And so now, COVID and again, the material reality is now throwing those things out there. And so these are opportunities for freedom. But as I said, very often the thing is on a knife edge. You can go both ways. You can actually, so people can now come, the teachers, for example, are under tremendous pressure. Mm-hmm. They are those who are parents too. So they're at home teaching. They have children who are supposed to be in the classroom. And unlike where you could go to a class and have an 8-hour, you're now getting WhatsApps coming in, you now have to prepare classes and so forth. These are things that are destroying human beings. And of course, that's why I say, so therefore, what the opportunities for freedom are there, but the opportunities for greater immiseration and exploitation and so forth. The other question is, you must also ask who are the winners and who are the losers, because there are always winners and losers. That's the point I was making about tourism just now. So for example, and I will never stop saying it. So in St. Lucia, for example, you have a prime minister who comes from a tourism tradition, and when he's looking at COVID, he's not thinking of COVID as a human a health problem. He's looking at COVID, how can I help the hotels continue to make them money? And the first thing he heard was, we're going to use the hotels as quarantine places. That is obscene. So Barbados, for example, opened up its different points where people could go into quarantine. But you have a manager of a state thinking immediately, how can I milk the taxpayers or the people more to help my hotelier friends and so forth. So when no flights are coming in or fewer flights are coming in, you say, oh, turn the hotels into quarantine places and so forth. So as people who are always concerned about those kinds of problems, we have to organize around those kind of questions. We have to organize constantly. And whatever opportunities are there, Ayo, they never fall like manna from heaven. I never believe in manna from heaven. They come from real struggle. When you struggle, then manna falls from heaven for you. So if the Israelites didn't leave Egypt and so forth, there'd be no manna falling from heaven for them. So it's only when you begin to struggle, then you get manna from heaven. So never fall into the trap of scoffing at people who struggle, or people who always identifying what's the next stage in the struggle, or what is the next problem are we facing, and how we overcome it and so forth. We have to struggle to win those freedoms. If we don't struggle to win those freedoms, those opportunities for freedom will turn into our bane. They will work against us. So an employer will end up sucking us more dry, as opposed to us winning. So the teachers' unions, for example, they have their work cut out for them. The normal workers' unions have the private sector unions have their work cut out for them. Don't assume that some benign prime minister will sit down and make laws on their behalf and so forth. That will never happen. It will not happen. So you have to now struggle for it and then identify what the challenges are and so forth, and understand how you articulate them and how you put. That's why I think the wildcat strike, I support it 100%. Because what a wildcat strike means is that you're saying to your unions, I'm not waiting for you to lead me. I'm saying that's my, and what's going to happen? Then the unions will start playing catch up. So, and then, because remember the trade unionists, the official ones are part of that happened from the 1930s onwards. They're part of the governing system. Their role, and when you read Arthur Mace's Labor in the West Indies, he said so quite openly. One of the problems the Caribbean faced was that you didn't have any structured way of ensuring labor relations, and therefore the workers would make strange demands on the sugar owners. And therefore, to prevent that from happening, you need a structured industrial relations system that every year you know what the price increase is going to be, what the wage demand is going to be, and so forth. So they were also part of a mediating system to help capitalism and help the system survive. So now that we're seeing the opposite again, it fills me with some kind of optimism that that old post-1945 system is unraveling and something new is emerging. But always, these are very dangerous moments, because when those things collapse, when you have these moments of upheaval, a lot of bad things will happen to a lot of good people. But in the long, long, long run, we hope that it eases up and we can see some light. So maybe our children and our grandchildren will understand that there was a particular struggle at the end of 2000, leading up to 2020, even 2025 and so forth. And then a new system emerged and so forth, where you can have black hoteliers and black owners of an economy. And there's no Nelson in your country and so forth. And there's a socialized medicine, and nobody is saying anything but free education and so forth. These are struggles that we are going through so that they would have a long period of peace. And you won't have any Donald Trumps again. So in other words, you had a Donald Trump because of the system allowed it to happen. They were so overconfident in their bourgeois arrogance that they could bring a naked capitalist and say that he is the best thing. And he failed miserably. He collapsed because it was based on falsehood. It was based on absolute idiocy and falsehood. But people in their arrogance and their foolish mediocrity, they're so arrogant and they were so blasé in the post-communist period that they could do anything. And you saw the full horrendous failure of that. And now common sense is now beginning to settle back into. All the people who were praising Donald Trump, their mouths are shut now. All the people who were saying no free education for business, their mouths are shut now and so forth. So that's how you win your arguments against them.
No, if they think free education is too expensive, just think about.
Look at the cost of it. That's right.
Yeah, the cost of ignorance, right?
Yeah, the cost of ignorance. That's right. That's right. A system that in which you had Barrow and his post-colonial project that made the difference between Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean. Nobody can tell me anything else that made the difference. You see the foolishness of it all, and that is what separates Barbados from every other Caribbean country. And then a generation emerges to say, based on neoliberal stupidity about the state and saying that you're going to just do away with that. You see, look at the impact. The people voted you out of office in a way you'd never seen before. That is the height of neoliberal stupidity, where you have a settlement and you have a kind of, nobody said it was perfect, but that was like in England, they would not dare touch the NHS. Margaret Thatcher came in, she could say what she wanted. She had to live and die, and the National Health Service remained. So the same thing is the thing in Barbados. And one of the saddest things for me was there's a generation of Barbadian students, about 3 or 4 years, who had to pay their way because a set of people who had no answer to neoliberalism. They just drank it. They just drank the Kool-Aid and they swallowed it and they imposed that on people. And they were so arrogant in the arguments about it, and it just disappeared. It just disappeared. Like I always argue, the objective always wins over the subjective. Always. So whenever I hear and see subjective stupidity, you just call it out and you just wait. In fact, sometimes patience might be the most beautiful political value that any human being can have. You have a lot of political patience. So you have to wait through Trump, wait through that, just watch it unfold and so forth. And even in the height of it collapsing, they don't even know that it's collapsing. So he himself got COVID himself. You would think it would have been, he got COVID himself, almost died, and came out on the other side with more foolishness and more, and now he lost the election and still more foolishness. Because you know why he's doing that? Because he was never a political personality. That's the other myth too. That, these politicians, the people who are trained, kind of Plato several millennia ago told us that a political type is a rare and special type. But you came out with this, a businessman is a politician and he has all the tools to run a country. And the tools are those that all these other people did not have. All these people who were doing it for decades and millennia were wrong because they were pure politicians and then I would come and run a country the way a businessman runs a country, and I give my daughter a job, my son-in-law a job, and so forth. That's the foolishness that passed. And I'm so sorry that my children had to live to see that as our children had to live to see that as a concrete reality. It lowered their standards as to what politics is about and so forth. But I'm also happy that it came to a crashing halt.
We can see that.
Yeah.
So I just want to pick you up on a couple points. the point concerning, I mean, you're a little bit more optimistic than I am with the current COVID environment and what that would now augur for the workers and workers being able to negotiate with the employers. I mean, don't you think that, you know, these stay-at-home orders and the fact that workers are now going to be, there's going to be a greater degree of isolation, right? I mean, you pointed towards the teachers, right, and what they're facing. Are you really, I know you also said that, you know, it can go both ways, right? So there's no guarantee that things will work out in workers' favor at this moment. But why are you optimistic though? I guess that's because I am.
Well, very good. So Gramsci used to say, Antonio Gramsci used to say, you must maintain an optimism of the will, despite the pessimism of the intellect. Very good. So, but you are optimistic when you believe in struggle. In other words, I see you have two cell overture in your background there. What was more horrendously a thing that slavery? That's the Black Jacobin. It's very good. What was more oppressive than slavery? There are some people who think about this. Let's cast our minds back, my friends. Think of yourself in the year 1750. I know what rights you had. You were chattel, you know, but people struggled against it. And you know what? They never stopped struggling against it. There is not a single day. Any woman who's oppressed in her home would understand what I'm trying to tell you there. You struggle against it every day. Any oppressive system that you have, Terry, you struggle against it. That is my source of my optimism. So right. you I know you have a kind of long view and you want to see, or you're watching it in terms of what is happening to them now. But they're going to respond to it, Terry. They're going to respond. They're going to, that's why I kept making the point about the wildcat strikes. There are people now going to the NIS. No union organizing them. They are taking up themselves and they're going to the NIS and they're saying that you promised us and we are going to be there every day. If you think you will stop seeing us, that's what they've been saying. Now that is where the optimism comes from. And I also know too that Marx used to say, man can serve himself only such tasks as he's able to solve. So when you ask me, why am I optimistic? I'm saying the very fact that you're making a demand, the very fact I'm just telling you there, for example, that I am saying that an employer has to factor in the cost of my electricity in my paycheck. The fact that I am saying it to you that way, I couldn't say that to you before I was working at home, Terry. But I can say that to you now as a concrete material reality. So in other words, to give you a Caribbean explanation of what Max was trying to say, if salt has never been discovered, when you taste your breadfruit, you cannot say your breadfruit needs some salt. The very fact that there is something called salt means that I can say my breadfruit needs some salt. So I'm saying to you, Terry, that's where the optimism comes in. People are going to make demands because the capitalists now want to maximize profit, find ways of milking it more for themselves and so forth. And people are also going to be trying to, that will be impacting on people, and they would be, so we're already beginning to see it. I see more hucksters outside. I see more people outside selling the food, and so there are different ways in which people are going to respond. We are also going to put pressure on the state. So we're already hearing the thing about extending the period of unemployment. You know what I'm saying to you? So there are going to be new demand, not just the welcome stamp, which is a government initiative and so forth. Ordinary people on a daily basis are going to be doing things to make sure that they survive. Human beings are not mules. You see, the mules were a cross between a donkey and a horse, right? Right. And then we can simply stop producing mules when the motor car comes in. We don't stop producing human beings, and human beings will demand and make and want to live in a particular way. Okay, and it's going to be difficult, but it's also at the end of the day, it's going to lead to better results. I'm confident. I'm very confident of that. So just to answer you, why I'm optimistic, why aren't we using private hospitals and private medical services to make COVID vaccine available to human beings?
We can't.
We cannot. Why can't we?
Too much. It requires too much funding.
Not just that, it's a public health issue, because although it could happen that way, in an apartheid system, we simply let those who can afford vaccinate themselves and so forth. But it has not happened that way, because the system has moved in a way that will not allow it to happen. Human beings have organized themselves in such a way that it will not allow it to happen. And that's why I'm optimistic.
Quick question, Dr. Joseph. I'm not sure if you can answer this one quickly, but you made mention of struggle, and we've seen the labor unrest within Barbados in recent weeks. What would you say, or what would you say we've not seen a similar response in other Caribbean territories? St. Lucia, for instance, maybe. I stand to be corrected, but I've not seen in the headlines much labor unrest throughout the region, despite they're faced with a very similar situation.
And they are.
St. Lucia has nothing called severance pay. St. Lucia has nothing called NIS, and St. Lucia has not. In other words, Barbados has developed a social framework that is further advanced. So again, Mark had explained that to all of us already, that the more advanced the working class, the more advanced is political struggle. So there was never any struggle for free education in St. Lucia. There could not be a struggle for free education because there was never any free education in St. Lucia. So the Barbadian working class is doing things commensurate with where it stands in relation to its own domestic capital. So to say that there will be other types of struggle in St. Lucia that you would not see in Barbados. There might be other cultural forms of expression in St. Lucia that you would have seen in Barbados. There would be other things like people growing their own food and so forth, and surviving without the state, and not begging anybody for food in St. Lucia. So you do the analysis based on the kind of material reality, the level of development of the working class, and then you know what forms of struggle it would take. In Trinidad, there would be calypso and all kind of different things, expressing themselves in different ways and so forth.
At this time of year.
Yeah. Exactly. So that is the answer to your question, Devon. So it is the level of development of the Barbadian working class that they can organize, because there's something called severance, which is an expectation that their grandfathers used to have, and they're not other countries in the Caribbean don't have it in the way it has been. Well, unemployment benefit. I don't think anybody in St. Lucia knows that concept in the way that you know it here. So that's because of the development of your social services, the social security. So the working class in Barbados is responding based on the objective material circumstance of the Barbadian working class. And the St. Lucian working class will organize according to, so okay, let me give another example. In St. Lucia, you used to have peasant revolts. I write about peasant revolts in St. Lucia. I can't write about any peasant revolt in Barbados. There can be no peasant revolt in Barbados because there's no peasantry in Barbados. But there'll be peasant revolt. If you follow the news in the 1990s, they blocked the roads, blocked all the highways and burning the tires in the road, and no plane can land in St. Lucia. That's a peasant revolt. But you can have that. You have that type of struggle in Barbados. You can have that in Barbados. You'll have other types of struggle. You'll have an organized union and so forth. So that's my answer to your question, Devon. And notice I didn't say anything about backward and advanced. I just told you the different materials, the different material, objective material circumstances will determine the kinds of struggle that in St. Lucia you have a member of the elite petty bourgeoisie being elected as a prime minister. I can put my neck on it and say it can never happen in Barbados. Impossible. You think Carl Williams will run for office in Barbados and people will elect him because he's Carl Williams? It is impossible. So people who say we can make predictions. I'm making one now. It is impossible for it to happen in Barbados, but it happened in St. Lucia.
I don't know if it's like this in Caribbean back in the politics.
Don't blame the people that they were so.
I was saying I don't even think they can creep back into our politics.
Exactly. In fact, they're doing the smart thing. They're now running it from a point of view of the economy and so forth, and they will make the noise about Nelson and so forth. But the system will not allow them to come and run in a offer themselves a political party and be elected as political leader. And impossible. But the objective level of development of the St. Lucian working class allowed it to happen in St. Lucia.
You have to blame the result.
Yeah. It's deeper than that.
We can go on all night and we can listen to you all night. This is
I don't like doing those things because my worst side comes out. My nice little choir boy image I like to give to the public. You all force me to bring the worst element of myself out.
Well,
that's normally reserved. It's normally reserved for the classroom of 30 people or 40 people, right?
We actually got a spike in our comments.
The cursing me, right?
Exactly. Actually, agreeing with you.
I'm just teasing.
Don't worry. So So, but I don't need to end it here. I did give you a little bit of leeway because you're the last guest coming in. But thank you so much for coming in again, and thank you for kicking off this show for us. And thank you for helping us to make it a success. And I do appreciate that. I wish you well.
Well, I have to thank you all actually, because what you all have done is to show that, I mean, all of you were students at UE and doing very well. And I'm saying that you all are actually, no, that's not a job. In other words, that's exactly the kind of thing that your education has empowered you to do. Plus, you all are younger and you all have used a modern platform, and Devon did his work on new forms of democracy and is actually living and demonstrating it. So you all are actually a window as to what the future would look like. Okay, so people always tell me, why you don't have a web page and have a blog and so forth. And I always say, well, my daughters will organize me with that, because they say, but you see, the point is you have the tools, and you all are doing, and I think you are making a very worthwhile contribution to the political discourse in Barbados and to the level of development of political understanding to the Caribbean as well. So I must congratulate you all for the initiative and hope that you all continue into the next year. And don't start these projects with a life end. I always tell people what we're supposed to do is, when we start those projects, especially with politics, politics is a lifelong vocation. So you will start by doing and say, I will be 65 years old and still doing that. And there's nothing wrong with that, because by the time you blink, 10 years have passed and so forth, and you become part of a institutional framework of the country. Politics is not a one-day overnight job. Anytime you're engaging in a political project, think of it as long-term and permanent. Otherwise, you would engage in a kind of opportunism, and opportunists do that. They think of the thing in terms of the now and what they can get from it. And I'm sure you all don't have anything to get from it in a material sense, except that you all have an avenue, a voice, and a way of influencing political discourse in your country. So I must congratulate all of you for the effort, and not just the effort, for the concrete contribution that you all are making.
Thank you.
That's basically that was our aim, just to bring different ways of thinking about politics and what politics really is, and not just belonging to certain people, but all of us operate. Everything is political, basically, on a day-to-day basis, even if we don't think that it is. And really, how we should be thinking about how we traverse the world and that type of thing. But bringing all those voices together, everybody won't disagree. We all have different views. But that was the main aim, and I think that we have kind of achieved that in the first season. Going into the next season, and we have set a date, so we're not gonna go off and never come back. We've set a date.
Agreed.
We're definitely planning towards it. And there are other things that you can look forward to seeing coming out of this space, not just that would give you something material to hold and to read or what have you coming out of this at some point in time. So
and I'm sure there are new faces and young faces, and I'm sure that's the idea, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So congrats for everything.
And thank you for helping us kick off the show. And
Dr. Joseph.
In the new year. Go ahead, everyone.
No, you continue, Terry.
No, I'm just going to finish off by saying that we see it too as a creature of the Faculty of Social Science as well. The show as a creature of our faculty there at the University of West Indies. And so we like to have more people from academia, from actual civil society, coming on the show, young, fresh faces, and hopefully we can make a contribution.
Okay, you are making a contribution. Thank you.
And Deborah, you were saying?
No, nothing at all. I was just thanking Dr. Joseph as well for coming on, and he was the first guest, and it was always a very good conversation. It's always a learning experience, so definitely.
Thank you.
And always irritated. So yes, thank you, Dr. Joseph. And as we come to a close, let me just express gratitude to all of you, our guests who joined us during this season. And again today, thank you to those of you who continually zoom into our show each week, and pun intended. And those of you who share, ask questions, make comments, and generally just support the show. You guys are the real MVPs, man. Devron, our guest host, love you, man. You always controversial, always sharp, and you do bring something to the show, something different. because Terry and I would just sit here and nod at each other and agree.
I agree with you, Ayo.
Have this change.
we need different
World
perspectives, and everyone definitely brings that.
Yeah. So thank you for agreeing to join us in that. And of course, you, Terry, my producer and co-host. Thank you, my brother. We did it. J.J.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes,
Yes,
we did it. We did. Thanks, Ayo. And yes, we did it. Even though we're separated by, the Atlantic Ocean, I like to think that we're always united in spirit. I like to think that we're always united in love. And to the audience, thanks for being here with us. 2020 was a difficult year, but thanks for waiting it out with us. And I just want to end off by making a special dedication to an individual who helped to inspire the show. He's no longer with us because he died this year. 2020 was a rough year, but rest in peace, Michael Brooks. Thank you so much for all your contributions.
You guys should check him out on YouTube.
Sorry.